to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the king, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This meeting of the Honourable Senate for Friday, September 23, 2022 is called to order. Minister Samoud, I recognize you from a seat other than your own. Statements by ministers, announcements, bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate. I'm sorry.
Mr. President, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled Special Economic Zones Amendment Act 2022.
A bill shortly entitled the Special Economic Zones Amendment Act 2022, read a first time.
Thank you very much. Public business.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of the bill and make it through all its concluding stages.
Really?
Yes.
So the question is that the standing orders be suspended to, Oh, of course. I was well aware of that, Ms. Curtis. I'm very focused. Public business.
Mr. President, it is intended that we will conclude the debate on the Firearms Act this morning and take it through its concluding stages. I also wish to note that Minister Hill's bill is indeed time sensitive, so we expect to take that through its concluding stages. The only request, especially considering the inclement weather, I would make is that persons use their time wisely with intervention so that we don't keep the staff longer than we need to.
Thank you very much. And what I've done is to indicate to the clerk that rather than taking a break at lunchtime, if necessary, we'll just shuffle through Ms. Curtis rather than rising for lunch. Shuffle through meaning do it in a sort of relay stage. Thank you very much. Senator Brown, I believe.
Yes, Mr. President, the leader of government business yesterday indicated our general support for this bill, the firearms opposition business. No, it is forecast in the future. the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulations Act of 2022. I believe this is the first piece of legislation that will bear in its early dispensation that it is going to be done, not enacted by the Queen's most excellent majesty, but by the King. It's interesting that the King of England and King of Jamaica, first legislation in his name is about the Firearms Act. Firearms that are not made in Jamaica, but are imported from abroad in the main, and that have resulted in the deaths of so many of our people. Mr. President, when I listened to Senator Bunting yesterday, it was clear from the statistics he revealed that Jamaica is bleeding badly. A bleeding that we all ought to take note of and do something about. The truth is, Mr. President, murder is happening everywhere, and nobody feels safe, be it on the road, be it at church, be it at school, be it at the workplace. Nobody feels safe. Last Sunday, at a football game in Spring Village in St. Catherine, 3 persons was fatally wounded. 2 female and a male. And it reminds me, Mr. President, that in 1993, I took my 4-year-old son then to a football game in Marvally. And I remember it because the photograph of himself in his Auntie Portia's lap was published in the 3rd weekly edition of the Jamaica Observer, a copy of which I still have. But I could take my 4-year-old son then and felt safe, 93, 30 years after. Donna, Senator Scott Motley, I don't know I can take Xander, my grandson, to another football game and feel safe. So you better watch football on TV. He's 11 months, and I shudder what will happen 3 years from now if we don't cauterize this killing, these killings, the bleeding of our country. So nowhere is safe. People are not able to go to bed with their windows and doors open, and in a significant number able to wake up and still be alive, Senator Morris. That was a promise made to our people, a promise that has not been fulfilled. And so this legislation is coming against the background of that failed promise. And we sincerely hope on this side that we can move beyond failed promise to effective execution of an anti-crime, anti-murder, anti-illegal guns policy and action. Mr. President, given this fear that grips our society, something has to be done. And I note that recently, Senator Bunting, the country was called to have 12 days of mourning. Mr. President, last year 1,463 Jamaicans were murdered. And if I listen to Senator Samuda, much more than that over cumulative number of years. We have had no mourning nationally for them. And so, Senator Samuda, I wish to propose today that in honor of the victims, in honor of the victims' families, that the government, through King's House, proclaim 12 months, not 12 days, 12 months of mourning for the victims of illegal gun in the main in the country. And I'm making that proposal to the government. 12 months commencing with the appointed day of this legislation. 12 months when we mobilize the political parties, the religious communities, the church, the mosque, the temples. 12 months when we mobilize civil society, the trade unions, the private sector, and I know the private sector has been very generous in recent times. Let's mobilize them and let's call upon their generosity. Let's mobilize the artists, the students, the entire people of Jamaica in a 12-month campaign against illegal guns. Let's focus the nation's attention. Let us, in football parlance, since the recent football killing, let us red card illegal guns. Let us red card illegal guns. So, this campaign of 12 months of mourning should get much more attention than the 12 days of mourning we recently had. I believe this is more relevant than those 12 days. This 12-month, Minister Samuda, should see town hall meetings, meetings in schools, in communities, meetings of the farmers' organization, every month for those 12 months, talking about the evil of illegal firearms, working through as a national solution against illegal guns. Let us do it together. This is not for you, your side, or our side. This is about the nation coming together over a 12-month period of mourning. Mourning in honor of the victims, but going beyond mourning, celebrate, mobilizing for the ending and the destruction of illegal firearms. And in so doing, we will red card illegal guns. Let us be clear. It's a dangerous foul. It's a fatal foul. Let us red card illegal guns. So you will have our support. You'll have our support in fighting against illegal guns. Senator Bunting made that clear yesterday. The other speakers on this side will make it clear. The opposition supports the campaign against illegal guns. I remember Senator Bunting, when he was minister, set a campaign in 2015, get the guns. So we have historically and now been supportive of removing the illegal guns from the society. It is against that background, President, that I want to address this bill and make some comments relative to the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act of 2022. As part of that background, I must mention that in August 2019, fully 3 years ago, Minister Chang said that 200 illegal guns, approximately 200 illegal guns, were coming into the country on a monthly basis. 200. And if we take that 3 years, intelligence, if we take those 3 years, Mr. President, 36 months by 200, that's 7,200 illegal guns that would have come in that 3-year period. Not much was done by the government to arrest those. In February of this year, Mr. President, the Honourable Prime Minister, Andrew Michael Owens, indicated that a campaign was being launched entitled Get Every Illegal Gun. That's February. At that time, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Today, I'm appealing to persons who are in possession of illegal weapons to give them up. Give up your illegal weapons using any one of the information channels that are available. We have Crime Stop, that you just need to dial 311. You have the JDF, tip line, or just dial 119. Tell us what you know about the guns," he said. And then the article was editorialized as follows. That's a comment of the Prime Minister, end of quote. This is what was said thereafter. "This is the boldest and most by the government to tackle its crime monster apart from creating the Zone of Special Operations, ZOZO, since 2017. That year, the government had a similar program that provided a 100 million J to get illegal guns and ammunition off the street. At that time, the administration paid 150,000 J for a semi-automatic, I suspect, rifle. Jamaica, 100 for shotguns, revolvers, and revolvers for 75,000, and negotiable payment after that. So, in February, the Prime Minister announced a buyback of the guns. How has that program fared, Minister Samula? The country needs to know. I wasn't here part of your speech, so I apologize. But it would be fine. It would be fine. So that's why I'm asking again, so you could repeat it. So I wasn't here, and I did apologize to you for not being here. No, I was at the tribunal. So what I want to be clear, the country could be reminded, what has been the outcome of that most bold effort by this government? How successful was it? And how do we measure success? Because that's an important issue in the battle for victory over the illegal guns and the gunsmen. Will this bill have a different outcome from the Prime Minister initiative of February this year? I think even the media have forgotten that initiative. They need to call it up and ask, what was the outcome? Will this bill before us, Mr. President, have a different outcome? And I ask the question because a former Prime Minister of Jamaica once said that hope is not a strategy. And President, I hope you won't correct me that I am misquoting Mr. Siaga. He said hope is not a strategy. And it struck me that successive governments, that all we have done about crime is to hope. We hope that some new legislation will fix the problem. So let me go back to 1974. My government was in power then. Michael Manley was Prime Minister. We came with the Suppression of Crime Act. we came with the Suppression of Crime Act. We came with the gun court. And President, you'll recall, the gun court was painted red because it dread. We had indefinite detention, not just life sentence, but indefinite detention. Did it result in a reduction in crime, murders, the use of illegal firearms? No. We went further, Member Senator Sinclair. And the Parliament, I know, so I ignore you and I recognize you. The Parliament said then, no jury for gun crime. We were going to have in-camera hearing and still have. And the media couldn't even report on who the witnesses were or what was said therein. Has that resulted in a reduction in crime? The answer must be a resounding no. So this hope for legislation hasn't worked. President, at some time along the road, we went to paper statement. We no longer need a witness to come in certain circumstances to be cross-examined. Somebody could be convicted, Senator Campbell, and the mere paper statement without cross-examination. Statement from John Brown.
Senator Brown, I'm not going to interrupt you again, but that was because people were killing witnesses. That's why it was introduced. See, Mr. Bunting, sit down in front of you here. People were killing witnesses, and because of that, persons were committing the most heinous crimes and getting away with it. That is why that was introduced. So don't make it sound like it is some sort of draconian thing.
President, for each of them, and yes, you did interrupt me, for each of them, we could give an explanation why we did that. Why we did that. The point I'm making...
Well, that one worked.
President...
Because they were killing witnesses. Witnesses were coming to court and going to gun court, and before they leave out of the prisons of the court, people gun them down, shoot them in front of gun court, and kill them on King's House.
Mr. President. Mr. President, with the greatest respect to the office, you are supposed to be the presiding officer.
Presiding officer or not, I'm not going to all sit here and make somebody disparage the judicial system that is trying to keep this country safe. So you could object a little more.
Nobody is disparaging the judicial system,
yes, that's
Mr.
what he's
President.
doing. And talking about the use of paper statement like it is some form of subterfuge.
No, Mr.
That was
President,
introduced because they were murdering witnesses.
You are not supposed to be interfering in the debate like that, Mr. President. You know, it is very disrespectful and unbecoming of the office.
President, you would appear to me to be disingenuous. I spoke about the Parliament making these changes. And you are trying to deflect to the judiciary.
The Parliament never made the changes if the judiciary didn't want it to protect the witnesses.
That changed the Evidence Act. And you know that. But then again, it suits you to intervene, even though you ought not to be intervening on the floor. So I raise the point that along the way, legislation has been changed to make it easier to convict, to put people away, in the name of reducing crime. But sadly, the crime has increased. Last year, despite all of this, it is 1,463 murders. And I don't blame the judiciary. I want to make it absolutely clear. It is the political directorates across the parties that have advanced these positions in respect to crime fighting. The reality is that it isn't working. We even institute, the Parliament, President, institute a change in the firearm law where you could send somebody to prison for possession of firearm, even though you did not find the person in possession of the firearm. No, I want you to conduct yourself with decorum and allow the debate to flow. So I'm saying again, the Parliament went that way. It did not.
Mr. President, I hate to interrupt your soliloquy, but I do think that the learned minister will have the opportunity to deal with these matters in his closing. I know how passionate you are about this, but it is interrupting the process of the debate. And I beg you to allow the senator to continue.
If the Senate, Mr. I do not need any assistance from you,
I'm taking a separate point of order because there's an incorrect assertion that has been made.
If the Speaker does not wish to invite my intervention, then when dealing with aspects of the implementation of the criminal law system and the judiciary, do not mislead. And you're talking about, you want me to take it up? You're talking about passing law to convict people when the gun is not found. If a person shoots somebody, it is hardly likely that you're going to find the gun or shoot at.
President, on a point of order. President, on a point of order. Can I take the point of order? So the senator in his presentation said that crime increased last year. If we continue to misdiagnose the problem, we will misprescribe the solution. The reality is crime has decreased every year since 2015. There is a category of crime which has increased. So it makes what he said incorrect. And for the purpose of the Hansard, since it will be the basis of school presentations decades to come, it cannot be left to stand as it is statistically incorrect.
It is not a point of order. Continue, please, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. The point I'm making, and I understand the reaction from that side and other sides in this triangle, is that despite these legislative actions, because the judiciary can't act without the legislator making these changes, the reality is that the crime situation, including murder, has not ameliorated. It has gotten worse, Senator Samuda. Worse than the 2015 speech about sleeping with your doors open. It has gotten worse since the Prime Minister made that speech. It has gotten worse since the Prime Minister has been in charge of the government. So let the record show that. So clearly, the strategy of hope is not working. But we pass these legislation and we expect that somehow things will change for the better. Hence my call for the 12 months of mourning, the 12 months of mobilizing the nation against illegal weapons, illegal firearms. Let us do something different than just passing legislation and hoping, because Siaga is right, hope is not a strategy. Mr. President, despite the legislature passing the Anti-Gang Act, by us on this side, we were in government, more gangs have exploded in the country. So it's not about just mere passing legislation and think that we can hope for an outcome. We passed quite correctly the anti-scammer set of legislation. But scamming continue. And some people may sing about government scamming. So, legislation by itself doesn't solve our problem. We need to mobilize the entire society from top to bottom, left and right, center and everywhere, in a crusade against the guns. Mr. President, when we pass this legislation, how will we know if it is successful? Are there going to be, if Senator Webby was here, I'd have said, key performance indicators? Will there be KPIs? So we can measure along the road when we come to the review of this legislation, if we have made progress. I sat on the Zozo Review Joint Select Committee. And it was clear, Senator Samud, and you were there, that we had no benchmark to measure progress, to measure success in that committee. So let us learn from that and see if we can, at some point, I'm not asking for it in the legislation, but as part of the policy going forward, establish key performance indicator that will tell us if we are making success, if we are stagnant, or we are going back. So I'm calling for the establishment of key performance indicator to tell us if we are going forward. I fear, Mr. President, that without that, and the declaration of an amnesty, for example, and I promise you, Dan, I wouldn't go into this. But how will we know if the amnesty is a success? Is there a threshold of guns we want to collect by it? And then we say it's a success? Amnesty doesn't seem to work in this country. First thing, Senator Samuda, is when you issue an amnesty for 3 months or 6 months, everybody wait to the last day and tell you to extend it. Amnesty doesn't work. We saw 2 or 3 amnesty for Road Traffic Act. It doesn't work. And recently I heard another call for amnesty under the Road Traffic Act. So I wish you well with your amnesty, but I don't think it's going to work. And if it works, how do we know if it's a success? President, I am of the view that moving sentencing discretion to the Court of Appeal, rather than allowing the judges at first instance, where there are much more judges than in the Court of Appeal, to take the judicial decision in respect to what the sentencing should be. It shouldn't be clogging up the already clogged Court of Appeal agenda. Trust our judges to make the right decision. So I hope, President, you will say, here is Senator Brown bigging up the judiciary and not disparaging the judiciary. So, I never draw you in before, but I draw you now. You walked voluntarily into it the first time. I'm now pulling you in because you have that good practice of defending the judges. Defend the judges with their discretion. Allow the first instance judges, the judges in the circuit court, in the Supreme Court, to make this decision. Don't need a certificate from them to go to the Court of Appeal and clog up the Court of Appeal agenda, which have many cases that is way behind its schedule, and they will recognize that. So I'm not supportive of the mandatory sentencing approach. I'm not supportive of that. And President, maybe the minister could be guided by the Privy Council recent decision in that Trinidad case dealing with bail. Part of the reasoning in that case, the Privy Council explained that there could be different circumstances which led to, in that case, murder. And therefore, the judges, and in particular the judges in first instance, and again I'm bigging up the judges, should be allowed to take the decision. So I'm urging you, Minister, to rethink and read that Privy Council case and see the reasoning, because certainly I am persuaded by those reasoning. I wish to make 2 other proposals in closing. And this is my personal proposal. I believe the country needs to be focused and the reduction of crime, reduction of murder. I believe this Parliament has passed all of these legislation, some of them to be reviewed 7 years, some 3 years, that a special select committee of the Parliament should be established to focus on crime reduction. To be able, like the U.S. Intelligence Committee or the U.S. Ways and Means Committee, or our own production, or whatever committee we have, to focus as a Parliament on what can be done, to get reports from the police, to use the data to drive policies, to be able to invite people in, to speak to it in camera and our public. But this parliamentary committee would be able to advise Cabinet on measures that ought to or can be taken to reduce crime, to reduce murder. We haven't tried that yet. Successive governments have not tried that yet. And I'm putting that on the table. I'm putting that on the table. I know he doesn't necessarily share my view on it. That's why I make it clear it is my view. But I believe there is nothing too technical that we can overcome. There's nothing too technical that we can overcome. But I believe it can be done, it ought to be done, so I make my second proposal. Because this opposition is not coming here just to oppose. We're putting things. Because Senator Campbell, the truth is time come for you to hear proposals.
Senator Brown, your time has come. Mr. Samuda.
I'm happy. I have just a few minutes and I want
I know.
I claim back the time of your intervention.
Mr. President, the Speaker's time having expired, I ask that his time be extended in line with his conscience to allow the presentation to be finished.
The question is that the Speaker's time be extended for him to complete his presentation. Those in favour?
I've been told, President, that I have a conscience of Fidel Castro. I could be expansive in my speech, but I have just one more point to make. Chairman, coincidentally yesterday, there are different people send me emails. One that came, Senator Samuda, was about, from a U.S. group in Chicago, about using the game of chess in the fight against violence. And I wish to propose to the government consideration. Talk with King's Counsel Wilkinson. KC. All right. How the game of chess, a game I learned in adulthood, can really assist in building critical thinking, building solution-oriented decision, building good decision-making. How we could incorporate that in our school system, 2 hours per week, from primary school, from prep school, to begin to plant the seeds of good decision-making in our children. So when they become adults, I'll be able to take my great-grandchild to a football game and feel safe. Because more of our people would be thinking positively. This is not the end-all and the be-all, but these are 3 little steps along the way from just passing legislation, hoping as a strategy that it will work. When your own former leader said, hope is not a strategy. Not many things I agree with him on, but that is one. Hope is not a strategy. And the approach to crime fighting has been too heavily on hope. So, Senator Samuda, the mere fact that it comes from me to you shouldn't be a basis for disagreeing and rejecting the call for 12 months of mourning. If Her Majesty could get 12 days in Jamaica, longer than anywhere else, we can give 12 months of mourning to the victims and their families, and use that 12 months to mobilize the society against illegal guns. And I say, you can always take the approach, red card against illegal guns. Red card as referee, which the government is in this. Red card against illegal guns. You will have us on the side until we are in the middle, applauding your red card against illegal guns. Let's do a month. We could put... Sorry? We could put a committee, a national committee in place to plan that effective, the 12 months effective, the commencement of this legislation. So we're not just passing the law. We are going to go out there and sell the law to the people, get the people involved in different ways in assisting us in red carding illegal firearms. Let's start with our children. Let's teach them games like chess that would allow better decision making. 3 little proposals, like those 3 little birds sitting on your window. Everything can begin to be all right if we work this together nationally, across party line, across religious denomination, bringing in our artists, bringing in our students, bringing in our civic society. We can do it, Senator Samuda. You urge us, as I listened to your ending, I didn't hear your beginning, but I listened to your ending yesterday. Let us do this together. We are in it with you if you play the ball the right way. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to support the passage of the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act 2022 before us. I was privileged to have been a part of the Joint Select Committee that deliberated on this bill. And in that committee, we discussed the myriad of concerns that arose in respect of the regime, both for dealing with illegal firearms and also the regime dealing with licensed firearms. I am pleased, Mr. President, that I think we arrived at a bill on a singular point, the limitation of the role of the minister in the granting of firearm authorizations. The Constitution and the functioning of the board under this bill has also been greatly strengthened. The elements of standardization and transparency to limit discrimination and arbitrariness have been greatly reduced, if not removed. And I think, Mr. President, that the Joint Select Committee arrived at a good place in creating a fair, equitable, and just process for obtaining a firearm authorization. Mr. President, we had some very robust discussions, and I think I can say that the issues were thoroughly ventilated. We agreed, we disagreed, we came to consensus on many issues, and there were some on which we agreed to disagree. One such issue, Mr. President, in which I believe we parted company, is the question of the mandatory minimum penalties attached to the offences outlined in Part 2 of the bill, and whether the mandatory nature of those penalties is an improper intrusion on the discretion of a judge in determining sentencing after conviction. And Senator Brown has said his piece in relation to that issue. Mr. President, the truth is that I grappled with the concept for myself for quite some time. How do we treat with the need, and I dare say the desire of the citizenry of this country to deal decisively with those elements in our society committed, and they are committed, to rampant gun violence and indiscriminate killing? And how do we carve out a space for the exercise of judicial discretion in the circumstances that warrant it? I won't, Mr. President, repeat the statistics on the homicide rates. We all know what those are. Suffice it to say, they are alarming, and they have put many of us Jamaicans into a state of fear and trepidation. And that, Mr. President, is unacceptable. Mr. President, the state has a duty to protect its citizens and to create an enabling environment for all of us to live, work, do business, and raise our families. We are all entitled to that protection. And I'm satisfied now, Mr. President, that the use of the mandatory minimum penalties outlined in this bill send a clear and unequivocal message to those who would flout the law, kill and create mayhem in our society. If you take up an illegal firearm and you're caught, you're going to go to prison for 15 years minimum. If you don't want to pay the time, don't do the crime. We have a system of government, Mr. President, that demands the election, not appointment, the election of members of Parliament in the House of Representatives to serve the people. The people decide who they wish to represent them, to form government, and to make decisions about the legislative framework that must secure law and order in our society. We, the people, don't elect judges. And I want you to hear me. There's no question, Mr. President, that judges have their independent role and function, and they are an essential part of our system of governance. They interpret the law, and they make decisions as to whether a person charged with an offense has been proven to breach the law. But judges do not and ought not make law. That responsibility, Mr. President, is firmly placed within the purview of the elected representatives of the people and ought not be interfered with. This bill, Mr. President, sets mandatory minimum penalties, which are serious penalties, in the context of an intolerable homicide rate, an existing and emerging gang culture, and a need to send a strong message that if you take up the gun illegally, you're going to be severely punished. It is a message of deterrence, it's a message of retribution, and Mr. President, I believe it finds its justification in the crime numbers along with a myriad of other initiatives, including the reform of the constabulary force. And so, Senator Brown, it is not true that this legislation is any kind of a panacea. It is one of the tools for crime fighting. Social intervention strategies have been discussed in our ZOSA committee. We have talked about a number of the initiatives that the government has undertaken. Mr. President, the judge in her courtroom is not without discretion in engaging the trial of any offender of any of the offences in this bill. There are a number of check and balances that attend a trial, not the least of which is the question of the admissibility of evidence that is proffered by the prosecution to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge has to weigh the factors that will permit that admission of evidence, and if those factors are not met, the evidence is deemed inadmissible. The significance of that, Mr. President, is that before we ever get to sentencing, we have first to get to conviction. And once there, the people have said, through our elected representatives, Judge, if you get to conviction in a case involving illegal firearms, 15 to 20 years is what you must spend behind bars before you can come back and join our good society, because we will not tolerating gun crimes anymore. Mr. President, the argument that this treads on judicial discretion to craft a just sentence in circumstances that suggest that the mandatory minimum penalty may be unjust has been debunked, and been debunked by no less than the Leader of Opposition in the House, who reminded the Parliament in his presentation during the debate on this bill about Section 42K of the Criminal Justice Administration Act, by way of amendments made in 2015 under the then administration, prescribes to a court, 42K, the authority to issue a certificate to a convicted person to seek leave to appeal against a sentence imposed in cases where the court is of the view that, having regard to the particular circumstances of the case, it would be manifestly excessive and unjust to sentence that person to the prescribed minimum penalty. In such cases, Mr. President, the appellate division of the court is empowered to reduce the sentence or to reduce the time that must be served before eligibility for parole. This provision, Mr. President, treats with the concerns about the limitations on the judicial discretion, if that is what you consider minimum penalties to be. In conjunction with the bill before us, the message is clear. If you take up the gun, you're caught, you're going to be punished severely. That is a message that the legislature has the right to send. But if your particular circumstance is such that the penalty is manifestly unjust and excessive, then there's a pathway for you to seek leave to appeal your sentence and have the appeal court reduce it. I don't think we could have come up with a fairer situation, Mr. President, and I, though having grappled with the issue of the limitation on judicial discretion, I am settled in my mind that the penalties set out in this bill are needed, are an appropriate response to the crimes that plague us, and are checked in the unusual case where they may be unjust by the provisions set out in the Criminal Justice Administration Act. Mr. President, I want to highlight some statistics that I received when I was doing my research in preparation for today's debate. And it highlights the problem we're facing. And nobody has said we don't have a problem. I think we all agree we have a big problem. But just so we can understand the magnitude of it. For the years 2016 to 2020, which are the years I was given the numbers for coming from the court, there were 5,637 cases filed in the High Court Division of the Gun Court in relation to gun crimes. Those cases, Mr. President, yielded 13,554 charges, roughly 24 charges per every 10 cases. Of the charges laid, the majority were for illegal possession of firearms and ammunition, a total of 3,781 charges between 2018 and 2020 alone. Shooting with intent had the next highest incidence, amounting to over 1,000 charges between 2018 and 2020. Mr. President, we cannot continue to do the same thing and expect different results. Insanity is not an appropriate approach to curbing crime. Thankfully, the Honourable Prime Minister and his able Minister of National Security,
victims of the same crime scene, the same kind of criminal activity that we are condemning. And I see you looking surprised, Senator Sinclair. Let me remind you of some of the instances that have come before the court. So people, one of them is very germane, you know, but I am aware that it has not yet been determined by the court. So I'll give you another. So a group of persons, say 4 persons, are being driven in a taxi. There is a police roadblock down the road. A man with a firearm is sitting on one side, a woman in the middle, and another man at the end. The man with the firearm drops the gun in the handbag of the woman sitting next to him. She's in possession. She's in possession. She knows that the gun is in her bag before she arrives at the police. She knows that the gun is in her bag, and there is a case exactly like that which was in the UK. In that case, the driver of a car, a woman came into his car, she had a stun gun. He knew she had the stun gun. She put it in the glove compartment. 10 minutes later, they were apprehended by the police. The police charged the driver with illegal possession of a firearm because the stun gun came under that. And the court found that he was in possession because he had 10 minutes to decide that he's going to take her out of the car, that he's going to come out of the car, and so on. So there are circumstances where you ask yourself, is such a person the kind of criminal that you want to teach a lesson? Is such a kind of person the criminal who you want to deter? Well, think on these things. You are adamant that that is what you want. And you are adamant that this legislation will add significantly to your fight against crime. I have something to tell you. Last year, you had 616 cases of illegal possession of firearms before the court. You had 228 convictions. So you had a 30.7%. And when I say convictions, I don't mean judge find you guilty. I mean guilty pleas also included. We have a problem in our judicial system. That is part of the frustration that people feel that the system does not work for them because their matters cannot be heard, cannot be disposed of. The guilty pleas have served some purpose. Because if a man knows that if he pleads guilty, he is going to get, his sentence is going to be reduced, it's a significant incentive. Let me tell you this. I predict that every single case, especially under 5 and under 15, will have to go to trial. Because the accused is going to say, whichever way I turn, Maka juke me. Let me take my risk. Let me take my chances. Let me take my chances. You know, I'm sorry to respond. I ought to know better than to respond across the aisle. But when hanging was around, when hanging was around, it was a deterrent to anybody, we wouldn't have any murder. Can you imagine that before somebody is going to commit a crime, they are going to say, oh, I can't do this. If I do it, I'm going to be hanged. Therefore, let me not do that. If that was the approach and that deterrent effect was by legislation, we would not be here today because we have always had strong laws against gun crimes. As Senator Lambert Brown said, it was a People's National Party government who passed the Suppression of Crimes Act It was a People's National Party government who passed the Gun Court Act, and we have learned, we repealed the Suppression of Crimes Act because we know that repressive and oppressive actions against the unfortunate in this society who we have failed does not work. Because we have failed the young people of this country and abandoned them to having criminality as their main option. Senator Campbell Rodriguez called for us to set up a different kind of life for young people. And we have to.
Senator Hill, this is most unlike you. Please allow the Speaker to complete her presentation in silence. Senator Sinclair, you are also slipping into it.
President, I have a provoking type of personality, especially to Senator Hill. But seriously, I made the point that we have enough blame to go around on both sides. We have enough blame to go around on both sides. And the time has come. We are in a desperate situation where we have to come together to see how we can resolve it. I don't agree that mandatory sentences is a part of the way to resolve it. And I'm not the only one. The tendency in the court now is to frown on mandatory sentences. We have had decisions at the Court of Appeal in Trinidad. That is the case of Barry Francis and the state Senator Graham. And in Belize with Bowen and Ferguson. And the tendency has to be to move away from mandatory sentencing and to preserve the discretion of the judiciary. We have had recently, just as we were announcing our own Bail Act, where the Privy Council spoke very disparagingly about the statutory denial of bail. And the courts moving away from mandatory sentencing because the courts believe that a judge should have the right to tailor the sentencing to fit the nature of the crime committed. So I know my pleas will fall on deaf ear. That has been made very clear. And I have to say this too. There was one member of parliament from the government side who practices criminal law, as quite a few of them did, who actually supported the position. And in doing so, pondered whether in fact she was going against government policy. We need more and more people who are willing to go against government policy. Because sometimes that's the best thing to do to arrive at a just situation. You cannot just keep quiet and silent when you know that your government is doing something wrong. You need to make your voices be heard.
Leave that to Charles to defend him.
Pardon me?
We are never silent. We are not silenced by what's happening in the other place.
You know, that's a very, Senators, through you, Mr. President, may I remind,
The Speaker's time is finished. It's completed. Yes.
I won't be. I'm going to speed it up.
The Speaker's time having expired, I ask that should be given enough time to complete her
Members should
presentation.
have heard the question. Those in favor?
I can always count on Senator Hill to support me, Mr. President. And that's the very point I'm making, you know, Senator Samuda. That's the very point I'm making, that you have to have some kind of independence, especially when it comes on to legislation.
Unless you're a member of...
I don't want to bait up Senator Golden Campbell. Bait up, exactly that. to delve into some colloquialism.
Having already done
having already done so. But one of the things, as I pointed out earlier, is her ability to separate herself from the government policy and look at the law itself. And I say to Senator Samuda through you, Mr. President, I would just invite others to do the same. So I'm conscious of the time, the fact that my time is up, and I want to make another point. The other point that I want to make is the exemption, the fact that under the Plea Bargaining Act, which we call it commonly, you can get a reduced sentence, but only on condition that you give information leading to the arrest of other persons. We live in a very small society. And this morning, Mr. President, you mentioned why we have to have witness protection. That is because that they will kill the witnesses as they're about to go into court or when they leave court. And I'm concerned about this provision. And the reason why I'm concerned about this provision is that if you actually, in Jamaica, get a reduced sentence in a situation where the signal has gone out, that is mandatory everywhere, and you are seen to get a lesser sentence, and then a member of your gang is taken in, you might actually be exposing that person to some danger, because it is going to be known, it is going to be clear that the reason why that person is not serving a mandatory sentence is because they have given up other members. So I just want you to consider all the ramifications of a clause such as this. Sometimes when you are enacting legislation, because you're all of like mind and you all see what you want to achieve, you don't see what else can result from that kind of situation. So, Mr. President, I just want to give one more caution. This bill is due for review in 7 years, and some people have been protesting and said it should be 5. 7 years is not going to be enough. You're not going to see the effect of this legislation for some time, because you're not going to get the guilty pleas. You're not going to get guilty pleas. People are not going to plead guilty when they know that the minimum they are going to get is 15 years. And the way in which the system is going to be clogged up, because from the data that Senator Golding Campbell spoke to, a significant amount of the cases are firearm-related offenses. When you go to trial, the possibility of a matter being disposed of in 1 year is highly desirable, but quite unlikely. And I would say, Senator Sinclair, that the average disposal time might be even 3 years. So you're not really going to get an opportunity to test whether this works. And you're certainly not going to get an opportunity to test the deterrent effect. I posit that in 2014, which was the lowest level of murders, we had 1,005 murders, the lowest in a decade. I posit that we had 120 gangs at that time, and that in spite of the legislation which we have passed, anti-gang legislation and all of the amendments which we have made to penalties, today our murder rate is increasing exponentially, and our gangs, we have over 350 gangs. So it calls for a different approach. It calls for a different approach. And Mr. President, I'm not going to burden the Senate with some of the approaches that I think would be commendable. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity, if the government so wishes, to actually talk about the approach to crime fighting. But I will say that, that unless, as Senator Samuda pointed out in a video presentation, that we had, was it 135 porous points that we had, and the borders, 145. And unless we start being aggressive and assertive in speaking truth to power and telling those who are in authority in the countries from which the guns come from, that they have a duty to secure the borders. And I know the Prime Minister said that we need a war on guns. I'm going to invite him to go further and to develop a strategy and to invite members of his team to go and forcefully speak to the United States of America to let them know that they owe Jamaica. They owe Jamaica to stop the guns coming in here. We cannot afford to patrol and protect 145 ports of entry, but they can do something about it. And it is time that they see that it is not only their duty, it is their responsibility. So, Mr. President, is this a silver bullet? Is this going to be a deterrent to crime? Is mandatory sentencing going to mean that more persons who ought to get the benefit of judicial discretion will have to serve 15 years or more? Only time will tell. Nothing has been said here to make me change my mind that it is right for the government to protect the populace. They have that duty. And the populace includes those people who are underprivileged, who are under duress in their communities, who are forced to do things that they don't want to do. And when caught in those circumstances, justice must be offered to them too. It's not one set of people. The way in which this is approached is that from you are found with a firearm, you're guilty. From you are before the court, you are guilty. And we know that that is not true. We know that there are many innocent people who are before the court. So the baying about 15 years, yes, you ought them up. It won't work, and it will result in a lot of harm. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott Motley. Senator.
You know, in the committees, a lot of times, myself and Senator Scott Motley, we agree, you know. Not this time. Fitz was agreeing with us, but then you pulled him back.
Senator Sinclair?
Yes, sir. That don't seem to have been independent. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to join with Senator Scott Motley. Yes, in commending the technical team and all the persons who participated in the review of the bill.
Quite a few of them here. You can
yes.
Quite a few.
I'm commending them, and you know, to face so many persons with different minds from different backgrounds, and they were able to put forward the positions and answer the various questions. I have to commend them for that. But there's one particular person I wish to highlight, and it is Miss Anila McCarthy. I have to. Because, Mr. President, we had, as Senator Scott Motley said, meetings that would go back to back and would go for hours, and she never moved from her seat. And she's not here, but her boss is here. And so I wish for her to take back the message to say that when we had to get the minutes out of meetings and we had to get updated reports, they were ready and emailed, and everybody was was fully briefed before they attended meetings, and I must commend her. I also want to commend the Honourable Minister Chang for how he conducted the meetings, ensure that we got through. It was over 20 meetings, Mr. Chairman and Mr. President, and with the limitations that we have in Parliament, he had to be forward-looking to get the dates, to block the dates, because there were several committee meetings that were taking place. And you know what it does highlight is the limitations of the Parliament as it is, and for us to move towards the building out of the physical space as well as the human capacity within the Parliament. But as I speak of the Minister, because we have been caught up in 2 weeks of public discussion about comments made by the Minister. And you know, what I thought the comments would more have been, Mr. President, is this. Instead of criticizing the Minister, why is it for the comments, and I don't think the comments were wrong, and I'll point out why I don't think they were wrong in how he made it. You know, but why is it that we didn't take the 2 weeks with all the persons, the representative from the church who spoke, the representative from JFJ, to send out a message? Do not take up guns after the police. Do not take up guns after our citizens. I thought that would have been the more likely message that we should have been getting across to the country. Because, Mr. President, I have looked on a document called the Caribbean Human Rights and Use of Force Model Policy. And when I look at the preface of it, I see reference to INDICOM and various agencies, Jamaica Constabulary Force, Jamaica Defense Force, the Department of Correctional Services, local ministries, and so forth, being involved in this whole process. And they created a chart and speaks to individual actions and officers' responses. And when I look at the chart, it says individual actions, that would be the person who would have caused the action. Where weapons are used against an officer is one. Attempting to disarm an officer is another. And life-threatening, weaponless assaults and the officer's response in this document and on this chart is deadly force in those 3 instances. So even when there is a weaponless assault on an officer, they are recommending deadly force as a response. Well, Mr. President, specific to the bill, I think it is a bill that its time has come. And it has been spoken about. Senator Brown made mention of it across the floor, and I believe other members who spoke about the incident at Spring Village in St. Catherine. And you know the videos that I've seen that came from that scene where you had women, children at an event that was seeking to engage a corporate citizen and the workers from that corporate body. With the community, there was an attack that took place. Persons injured, persons, some fatally. And Mr. President, by the grace of God, it could have been worse when you consider it. The perpetrators, I believe, committed an act of terrorism, and it is as plain and simple as that. But in Jamaica, we have an act that is called the Terrorism Prevention Act. But it doesn't capture a situation where a person who is arrested and charged for that type of situation that they created out at Spring Village, creating mayhem, creating fear in a community. And I wouldn't say it is even limited to the Spring Village community. It went far and wide when persons who would have seen it on various media, they would have had the concern But our Terrorism Prevention Act doesn't speak to situations like that. It limits our description of terrorism and where persons can be charged and penalized for that. For when it arises in a situation that has a political background, a religious background, or an ideological objective. And what I'm calling on government to do, the legislature, is that we must tweak the Terrorism Prevention Act to include situations where persons go out and create mayhem and conduct themselves in this terrorist type of way, as we saw in Springville. So if you go and shoot up a place that has 5 persons, categorize that under this legislation so that in addition to any other charges that they may face, that they also face one of being a terrorist. That is my recommendation. Mr. President, pardon me? Mr. President, I'm also saying that we must, as a legislator, because that is our function here, look on other legislation that has to be amended. Let us look on legislation that speaks to our Offences Against the Persons Act. Because presently we have mandatory minimum sentences there of 15 years for shooting with intent and wounding with intent. If we give in 15 years, Mr. President, for possession of firearm, the sentence has to go under that particular legislation. I may believe, if my memory serves me correct, that there may be an amendment that comes in that regard. But murder, we must have a similar review of that. Offences Against the Persons Act, because it cannot remain as it is currently. No, I think it is probably at the moment about 20.
No,
but it is
15 years, 20 for capital murder.
Very well. So we have to look on making adjustments there. And I want to say that other legislation should be brought. Harboring criminals, Mr. President. We see the police putting out, and it has gained success. They put out the Wanted Wednesday to engage society in respect to reporting on persons that they have an interest in and they may be wanted for offenses. Anyone who harbors a person who is put on a wanted list and made public to the public, made public, that we should be looking at anybody who harbors them, that they must face severe penalties. If you are a mother, if you are a father, and the police have an interest in your son, take in the person and get the situation cleared up. And then we may reduce the possibility of engagement and persons dying as a result of that engagement. So if you love your son, if you love your husband, and the police has an interest in them, walk them to the station. Get a JP, get a pastor, get a parliamentarian, get somebody to assist in that process and take in the person and reduce the possibility. This issues relating to statistics has been spoken about, and I won't mention them. But it really pains my heart, seriously, when we look on what happens in this country. And I find it very astonishing. Sometimes I sit and I think, in dreamland, that Jamaica can excel in so many areas, Mr. President. We excel in sports, we excel in music, we excel in even science. We have produced the Usain Bolt, the Shelley Fraser, Sherika Jackson, Elaine. From up in your farmer neck of the woods, Senator Bunting. Because I hear you're heading elsewhere now. You're heading elsewhere. But we gave, Mr. President, Jamaica gave the world Robert Nesta Marley, whose song One Love is used internationally to promote peace and love amongst the world. Persons of different countries, diversities, and so forth. But we still find in Jamaica where our brothers and sisters commit acts of violence and hate against each other. Mr. President, this particular bill, it has been said from over here, but the opposition seeks to want to present it in another way, as if we are saying it is the silver bullet. We have never said that. Nobody is saying that. We're not saying that. There are several other things, but what we are dealing with in this parliament now is this particular bill. We can't do two things at one time, sir. But there are several other things that are done, have been done, and continue to be done. We have increased the mobility of the police. We have increased the mobility of the police and provided them with equipment in order to perform their jobs in a better way. Mr. President, we are improving police stations right across Jamaica. Right across Jamaica. Presently, Mr. President, without referring to those that have already been improved, there are over 15 police stations that are receiving major improvement. And ground was recently broken in Frome. And you know, when I visit Westmoreland, Frome station ground is broken now for the improvement. But go to the main station in Savlamar. The main station in Savlamar, the detectives have no place to work. If you're going into the detective office and you want to change your mind, you have to come outside to change your mind. And if you have to walk sideways, and if you're not careful, probably you'll drop through the floor. So this administration is looking at improving the base from which these officers have to work, that have been untouched for years. And I guarantee you that if we ask Senator Bunting and we ask him to give us the full 100 of it, he will say, when he was Minister of National Security, he made requests for these things to be done and for funding to be provided to him and to the ministry, from the Ministry of Finance, but never got a positive response. So I don't know if it was from then that you had Peter versus Peter or what was taking place. But I am certain that if we ask Senator Bunting is going to tell us, I've been on my knees asking for resources. So we have had a situation of total neglect. Not true, Senator Bunting? Not true. Mr. President, this administration has improved border control. And we have purchased vessels for the JDF in order to do their patrols and to prevent guns from coming in and from illegal drugs going out. We need more. Now, Mr. President, the administration is presently putting in an integrated coastal surveillance radar system to improve the detection capabilities and the movement of guns and other contraband. And so the 145 unmanned ports that you speak of, Senator Scott Matley, we can try and block them before they can reach to those ports to offload. Things are being done. It is not only the bill that we are dealing with today. Improvements in intelligence gathering and the countless social intervention, and we heard comments from across the floor today speaking about Zozo. Well, let me tell you, in Mount Salem, where the first Zozo was put in Mount Salem, the stakeholders, if you check the media, and this is comments that have been made public by the CDC president for that particular area. The CDC president has proclaimed the physical and social transformation that has taken place in what she described as a once crime-plagued community. In Norwood, where there is another Zozo, where persons were leaving the community because of criminals and criminal activity, there is no almost total peace. So the Zozos are working, and obviously you agree because I hear the calls from many parliamentarians for Zozos to be put into their particular communities. Mr. President, in this bill, we have minimum mandatory sentences, and that has been spoken about quite a bit. A minority report was presented by the opposition, and I interpret it to say that they are opposed to it. Senator Scott Motley has said expressly that she's sticking to her guns. Yes, you are sticking to your guns in respect to the minimum. Well, the leader of opposition business, Senator Bunting, has said that you're supporting the bill. He didn't go into the particular. Yes, you have some concerns, but you're supporting it, which would be that you're supporting the minimum, as I understood you. Mr. President, what have they said in respect to that? And I will read from the report. The opposition members of your committee are, however, not in accord with the mandatory resentencing, which is a feature of the bill. The opposition members of your committee are of the view that mandatory sentencing removes the discretion of a judge to consider mitigating aspects of the sentencing. And they speak of there being no credible evidence that mandatory sentencing is a deterrent to the commission of an offense. Mr. President, legislation cannot be made without sanctions. Right? And the legislator speaks to what it indicates in particular legislation in relation to the sanctions. And this administration is sending a clear signal of its abhorrence to illegal gun possession. And we are speaking through the legislation. And that is where we come up with the minimum sentencing. Mr. President, penalties cannot be a deterrent. I disagree. And I'm going to rely on statistics, which reflect that since Jamaica ceased hanging for murder in 1988, and since the Privy Council decision of 1993, that is the Pratt and Morgan, which put the brakes on capital punishment, our murder rate, Mr. President, moved from 22 per 100,000, went up to as high as 61 per 100,000, and generally across the period in the last 5-10 years, you see it at 46, in that range, 46-50. So a person, Mr. President, I believe, because we had guns at that time, we had gangs at that time, but the murder rate wasn't at what we presently have now. What I'm saying, sir, is that on that, it reflects that there is a deterrence in respect to sanctions and potential sanctions. Mr. President, Jamaica is not alone in imposing severe and mandatory penalties for gun offenses. Sweden, country out of Europe, the country that prides itself as being the world's humanitarian superpower, has made it clear that severe penalties will be imposed on persons convicted of serious offenses. They have gone so far as to be removing principles of no jail time for young convicts. And in the Caribbean, in Barbados, Prime Minister, the Honourable Mayor Motley, has stated that there will be amendment to the Firearms Act, and that it will come in shortly where the sentence of imprisonment for illegal possession of guns will be mandatory. So it is not only Jamaica. Mr. President, she gives us the reason. I don't know if the last name has any connection, Senator Motley. There's a connection. Yes. Strong connection. She says that the reason for moving to mandatory prison sentence in Barbados is because of the prevalence of gun crime in Barbados. Mr. President, Jamaica does not produce guns. And so whatever they do in other countries that produce guns, whether it's in the United States or in Canada, they make them over there. And they have a business in the selling of guns and persons having guns and so forth. That is their business. We don't make guns in Jamaica. And as far as I'm concerned, I can't see why there is the reason for anyone wanting to have traffic or stockpile, much less using illegal firearms. And as Senator Golding Campbell said, if you choose to do the crime, then be prepared to do the time. Mr. President, the leader of the opposition raised the issue in the lower house about constitutional breach. And I believe it was suggested also by Senator Bunting. Well, we have minimum mandatory sentences that run in the 15-year period in our legislation, the Sexual Offences Act, the Offence Against the Persons Act. And those legislation have been in place for over 10 years. And nobody to know, as far as I'm aware, has raised or has challenged it constitutionally. The Sexual Offences Act has a minimum mandatory sentence of 15 years in certain circumstances. The Offence Against the Persons Act has it in relation to certain offences, but nobody has challenged it constitutionally. And many persons have been convicted under those legislation. So, Mr. President, there are several decided cases from our Court of Appeal, from the United Kingdom Privy Council, and even from the CCJ, that have looked on the principle of minimum mandatory sentences. Mr. President, primarily, you spoke about separation of powers. So I will address it. I'm addressing it. Take it easy. Mr. President, out of the Privy Council decision, this is what is contained in that decision, where the law lord said, the legislature has a legitimate interest in determining whether a particular conduct should be punished by a severe penalty. Legislature may fix a mandatory minimum for an offense, leaving it to the judiciary to determine the appropriate penalty. So you have a minimum, and you will have, say, a person. Life imprisonment is the upper limit. You exercise your discretion and set the appropriate sentence from the minimum to that maximum. Mandatory penalties less than the death penalty. And that is what is important, because Senator Brown spoke about legislation and tried to bring in an authority. He never made mention of the authority. But if he read it well, Mr. President, he will realize that most of those authorities are relating to death penalty cases. And this is how they look at it. Mandatory penalties less than the death penalty can pass the separation of powers test. So you can have mandatory sentences. The only one that they right now, and you look on the authorities are interfering with, are those that speak to the death penalty. You cannot have a mandatory death penalty sentence. That is what the authorities are saying. Privy Council, as well as in the CCJ. So in the CCJ, there was a decision where they upheld out of, I believe it was Belize, a 30-year minimum mandatory sentence. But they said, if you're going into the death penalty, mandatory, we're not into that. Mr. President, in a local Court of Appeal decision of Tafari Morrison versus the Queen at the time, which examined the imposition of a minimum mandatory sentence on a defendant who at the time of committing the offense for which he was charged and sentenced was a child. and the learned justice of appeal in the Tafari Morrison case said in relation to, and concluded the case in this way in relation to the minimum mandatory sentence. The mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years is affirmed, it not being unconstitutional and or disproportionate.
Thank you very much.
The Court of Appeal of Jamaica, in the case of Tafari Morrison, concluded it was an offense under the Offences Against the Person Act. Gun offense, and the person got injured. No. But what I'm saying, they concluded, and remember it was a child that we're dealing with. It's not unconstitutional, and it was not disproportionate. And what is interesting, and I read the other day where children advocates, this bill coming through Parliament, they come out and they say, we must find a way, and we must do this, and criticizing the bill. And I don't know why everybody seeks to criticize the bill. I will always go back to this. Have the persons stay away from illegal gun. It's simple as that, Mr. President. Stay away from illegal gun. But to them I want to say this. The Child Care and Protection Act, that has a lot of things in it to protect children, keep them out of prison, say that prison is the last thing for them. The Child Care and Protection Act, which was passed in 2004. Now, who was the government in 2004? Wasn't anybody from the side? But a child between the ages of 12 and 14 could be sentenced up to 25 years under the Child Care and Protection Act, passed by the administration, 2004. And if you're 15 to 18, you can get life imprisonment. The Child Care and Protection, and what are those offenses? One of those offenses that they allow for that type of sentencing of children, 12 to 14. Gun offenses was included in the schedule of offenses for which you could get 25 years. That is correct, but you open the opportunity for the could to happen. Mr. President, Senator Scott Matley also spoke about the particular situations, and she referred to an authority. And I want to say in response to that, what's the Paulson? Duress. So we talk about the gangs and the dons and so forth. Duress is a defense to possession. So what you do, Madam Scott Matley, because you're going to have to be tried anyhow. You are the person moving the gun from point A to point B. You are the person moving the gun from point A to point B. What it is that you do is that you ensure that when the police hold on to you, you start from right off the bat. But the judge never accepted it, obviously. The judge did not accept it. So, duress is still a defense. And the principles to ground possession, custody, control, and knowledge must be established beyond a reasonable doubt. I won't go any further into it. Senator Golding Campbell spoke to that. Must be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. So the burden there is high for you to establish that. Mr. President, I believe, and I'm going to draw because I was watching Senator Crawford on my television. Time come, Senator Crawford, that we must stand together in the struggle against illegal possession of guns. That is what we must do. Time come. Mr. President, it is without doubt that no one would wish for our children to suffer any sentence that separates them from their home or their family. In fact, this administration amended the CCPA to prevent uncontrollable children from being placed in juvenile centers. This administration, we don't want to lock up kids. We don't want to do that. And we have demonstrated that in how we dealt with the CCPA. We have demonstrated that with how we have dealt with the Child Diversion Act, where we seek to put in alternatives instead of having children incarcerated or locked up. What it is that the parents and every member of the community, I'm not going to go with the 12 months mourning argument as presented. Some of it makes sense, but the parents and every member of society, all the communities, we must band together and to protect our children and to keep our areas and their senses away from illegal guns and violence. So if we have a talk, and we have a talk on somebody, then let us do that. But we have to band together and do that. The relief points have been spoken up. You serious?
Mr. President, the members' time for speaking have been expired. I'd like to propose that he be given sufficient time to complete his presentation.
Senator Bunting, members should have heard the question. Those in favor? Senator Sinclair.
Mr. President, the relief points have been spoken about. I believe that the plea negotiations and agreements Act, the Criminal Justice Administration Act, they have been spoken about. But, you know, I can't exclude this. And I keep finding it when I come into this chamber. What I refer to as a level of hypocrisy that flows from across the floor. Why do I say this? That relates to mandatory sentence. Senator Scott Motley, you said you will not support a mandatory sentence. I don't know if you are speaking about a mandatory 15-year minimum sentence or just the principle of mandatory sentence. Because in respect to a particular bill that came through this parliament, the Trafficking in Persons Act, Mr. President, Senator Scott Motley spoke passionately in support of the removal of the court having the option of imposing fines for the offense. So Senator Scott Motley says it must be mandatory that you go to prison. Senator Scott Motley spoke passionately on that. Doesn't that remove the discretion of the judge to some extent in considering mitigating circumstances and tailoring the sentence, having regards to the particular circumstances warranted? Mandatory jail time. The previous legislation had it that you could be fined. So a judge could impose a fine on you because of the circumstances of the case. But Senator Scott Motley said, remove it, and send them to prison. Mandatory prison sentence under that particular legislation. Mr. President, there is a particular legislation called the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act that was passed by a Jamaica Labour Party administration many years ago, giving persons an opportunity for a second chance. You commit an offense, you can apply for expungement. You don't have to get it. You can apply for it. You apply for it, and you don't get it, then you would have to go through an appeal process. What did the PNP administration do in 2014 in respect to the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act? They created a third schedule. And I looked on the answer to see if anyone inside here was in Parliament at that time and spoke on it. And I noticed the name in here referring to one Mr. Bunting. Mr. Bunting. Damian, Senator Crawford, I don't see his name. But I see one Mr. Bunting. I don't know if it's Senator Peter Bunting, who was then Member of Parliament, MP Bunting, in the other place. So what they did with the legislation, Mr. President, what they did, they created a third schedule. And here how this third schedule goes. It starts out by this: offences for which convictions may not be expunged. So whether we put... You want me to repeat it? They created a schedule, I say, and it is headed, offences for which convictions may not be expunged. One of the offences would relate to offences under the Firearms. Huh? You have offences under... Say what? You have offences, too, that fall under... You went to find out why. You know what happens to a person who cannot expunge? A person who would have been convicted for any of these offences, they go to prison because the sanction of the law is that you go to prison. Whether it's 1 year or whatever the case may be, whether you get a suspended sentence because of the circumstances, as Senator Scott Matley wants to put it, you don't go to prison, you get road sentence, or you pay a fine. But you're convicted. Guess what happens? You can't get a clean criminal record, even though you have been punished and you have been rehabilitated. Because that is what law is about. That is what law is about. That is what law is about. Law is about sanctions. Sanctions is there to punish you. Sanctions is there to deter you. And when you go to prison, you must be rehabilitated. And when you're rehabilitated, Mr. President, then you should be given a second opportunity. Mr. Bunting and the members, the leader of the opposition now, Minister of Justice, write this and change it. That even if you went through, whether you get mandatory, you get none at all, but you are convicted, you cannot get a clean criminal record. And we know in Jamaica, to drive a taxi, Mr. President, to drive a taxi, don't go down that road, Senator Bunting. Senator Bunting, don't go down that road. I will, Senator Brown, Senators. Mr. President, whether you are rehabilitated or not, you cannot drive a taxi. Because to drive a taxi in Jamaica, you need a clean criminal record. So, Mr. President, here now. Yeah, man. Mr. President, what I'm asking for, and there are several examples that I can cite. I have seen a young lady who at 18 years old was arrested, charged for cocaine. She came back to Jamaica. She went to university, she got her degree. She got married, she got baptized, gone about 20 odd years. Went to university and got trained in education and a special skill in education, but she cannot use it in the way that she would want to use it because she have a criminal record. So, President, what I am calling for is for an amendment to the Criminal Records Rehabilitation Offenders Act, which was introduced in 2014, and for persons who are rehabilitated to be given a second chance. Mr. President, I move on to some recommendations. Because under this bill, we have a situation that you can receive a serious sentence, 15 years minimum. And what it is that I am saying in relation to this, first of all, is that we must have a fair trial. And what I mean by that is that it's the fairness in the process starts from the investigation. This fairness in the whole process starts from investigation. How do we get there? Our police officers who are going on operations must have body cameras. I'm fully in support of that. we must be fair in the entire process. We are putting in sentencing that takes up a lot of years. Minimum mandatory sentences, we must balance it in. Body cameras and on the police vehicles, dash cams to ensure a fair practice. We must use forensics, where the prosecution is seeking to prove its case of possession or otherwise. Have DNA samples taken from the accused. We have scene of crimes units that exist right across the island, and they can ensure that that is done. The DNA legislation, once you're arrested, DNA can be taken from you, and you can do the appropriate match in relation to DNA. So the commissioner and divisional commanders must demand professionalism from the men and women under their command in order to ensure fairness. Mr. President, trials must be swift. And swift in this context of minimum sentences is important on both sides, you know. Because if persons are not given bail, for whatever reason they are not given bail, the decided cases have confirmed that you don't get benefit for jail time in a situation where you are in custody in a minimum sentence type of case. So guess what? If the accused don't have any defense, don't waste the time. That is my recommendation to them. If it is that they have to enter a plea, then take the plea, because you don't get benefit. When you have minimum sentences, you do not get a benefit of time in custody. Mr. President, the supporting agencies to support the whole judicial process needs to be equipped and expanded. So ballistics testing facilities, I believe and recommend that we have a ballistics testing facility in Western Jamaica to support this legislation. In respect to the amnesty, I want to say that I agree with it. And you have ears to hear, let them hear. Because this administration, Mr. President, Prime Minister has spoken about it from last year. He has been speaking about the coming of this particular legislation. He has begged for persons to give up the guns. And in fact, they are offering cash for guns. And you're offering cash for guns. Take advantage of the opportunities. Take advantage of the amendment. And any cash that you get, Senator Bunting, that's not what my encouragement will be to them, to go buy any new gun. So if that is your encouragement to somebody who get a cash for gun, then what it is, well, if they want to go buy a new gun and they get caught with the gun, then they take the 15 year. It's as simple as that. The cash for gun is giving you an opportunity to turn over a new leaf in life. Mr. President, additional courts, I am also putting on the table for the administration's consideration. We need another gun court in Western Jamaica and a gun court in Central Jamaica, so that we can have matters taken through the process as quickly as possible. And rehabilitation over the 15 years, Senator Crawford. You know, take the persons and lock them up. Persons go through the whole process. Punishment, rehabilitation, and the rehabilitation must be real. I see videos coming out of our prisons with persons doing all sorts of things, but not going through a process of rehabilitation. And you have persons now who, after serving the time, come out, they fall back into their previous doings that caused them to be in prison. And so we need to have proper rehabilitation in our prisons. Improve witness protection. Senator Scott Matley spoke about persons informing. I am saying that we must improve the witness protection program. Persons have been protected in custody. Have been. You have seen some gang trials that have taken place, and persons have been protected whilst in custody and have given evidence in the cases. And they have gone so far as to partner with other jurisdictions in respect to dealing with the witness protection program. And improvements that have been made where you give evidence by video link and so forth, those things are in place. but there needs to be still improvements in the witness protection program. Mr. President, Senator Brown spoke to it. I join with you, Senator Brown, in respect to the call upon the artists who seek to just go around in many of their music videos and glorify guns, that we need to bring them into the whole scheme of things. And also to make them aware of another legislation interestingly passed, to the amendment to the Offence Against the Persons Act in 2015, that they can suffer penalties for promoting in their songs. Senator Bunting, I didn't know you had actually passed the legislation when we were discussing the anti-gang legislation. It is in the Offences Against the Persons Act, but it has never been used. So they need to be made aware and come on board in the manner that has been spoken about by Senator Brown, for them to be part of the whole process in removing this glorification of guns. You look at the videos, and all when them singing about them girlfriend, you see them up jump with M16s and AK-47s. We need to bring them on board. Mr. President, I spoke in a previous debate on control orders. I raise it again, where the youths who don't want to get voluntarily involved in the whole process, that under control orders, tweaking the relevant legislation, and using control orders, we can bring them in for training and so forth. And as I close, Mr. President, some quick comments on the regulated side of the bill. And I go particularly to Section 58 that deals with the grant of permits, where there has been amendments which I believe have set out in a more clear format what it needs for somebody to apply for and to obtain a firearm. Under the previous legislation, the existing legislation, the 1967 legislation, you can be refused a permit for any reason that you cannot be entrusted. There's an amendment that speaks to that section where you look on the fit and proper aspect of it. But it says that it must be a reasonable cause, which is a much higher standard than you refusing a person a firearm for any reason that you declare the person not to be fit and proper. So that it makes it a bit clearer, and I hope that we will quickly move away from what we have seen about this loose term of fit and proper and how it is used, and not establish a need to be armed. Because when you look at the application basically says to you, why you need a firearm? Protection of life and property. And whether you don't have no property, you have life. So you do have something to protect. And so that this script, I believe we need to move away from. I also point out that there are regulations to come under this particular bill, and the minister has committed, Mr. President, and they have been included at a clause 106D in this bill, which speaks to standards and sanctions. Standards and sanctions. And how this came up was because we sought to place a limit on the FLA in setting a time as to when they should either approve or deny an application. And we were in a discussion about it being done in 6 months. If the person is denied, they know they can move on to an appeal if they wish to, or they don't have to. And if they are approved, they are approved. But setting a time, what it does, I believe, is that it removes the likelihood of corruption, of somebody saying, look here, I can push the thing along for you. So it removes it. The minister has committed that documentation will be created under Section 106D, which sets service standards, and there will be sanctions if they are not followed. So I think that we have gotten an improvement of the circumstances under this particular bill. Mr. President, with all the words that I have said, I could have said a little more. I do support the passage of this bill, Mr. President, if it so pleases you.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair. Senator Crawford. Sorry, Senator Crawford, 1 minute. Senator, Mr. Samuda, please. 1 minute, Senator Crawford.
Time almost being 1:20.
No, man, it's 1:20 somewhere, you know, so believe me, it's 1:20 somewhere.
The time almost being 1:20, Mr. President, I ask that you not allow the Amen to speak. No, I take it back. No, in all seriousness, the time being 1:20, I ask that the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day.
Thank you very much. Members would have heard the question. It to be shortly 1:20, the question is that the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:20. Those in favor?
Don't want you have Senator Samuda text it on me now, Mr. President. Mr. He saw me wearing my pink tie, he rolled up put on him pink tie.
The concern is that I was wondering if two are coming from the same place.
Mr. President, I can understand the anxiety being felt within our society and the demand that is being put forward for something to happen. Indeed, I can understand the demand for something dramatic and drastic, because not only are we tired of mourning for others, we're also finding the society to be more risky with the uncertainty that crime has taken on in the last decade. There used to be a time that you could tell your children to come home before it's dark, with the assumption that it was more dark, more risky when night falls. That assumption has to be removed, because in the middle of the day, criminal activity is taking place. Criminals used to seek to hide in the shadows of the dark. There was a time that he said, don't go to certain places, and you felt that you were secure. There was some level of predictability that if I avoid X, Y, Z and avoid this company, I'd be all right. That wouldn't have included a football match. It wouldn't have included a school gate and a lot of the other things that we are a grave digging. It wouldn't have included those things. And indeed, there was a time that you can say you were not involved. And once you're not involved, you could feel some level of safety, even if as close as family members were involved. In the days when I was growing up, at most they'll say, tell your cousin or make me catch him, but he had nothing to do with you. In these days, that is not so. And so the additional risk that we are facing is creating great anxiety and creating, by extension, a call and a push for government to do something drastic. I also can see that outside of just the preservation of life, government understands what crime, in particular murder, does to a country. Senator Golden, there's this concept that I often repeat. I love it. Norman equation. It says that price must subsidize risk. It's for this reason that the same shoes downtown has to be cheaper than the same exact shoes uptown, because the risk perceived in going downtown must be subsidized by the price. That risk is not only physical in this case. It might have a risk of it being a false brand and all kind of thing, but it must be subsidized by the price. I see Senator Longmore trying to wonder where we're going with this. Oh, okay. No. And therefore, with going downtown with a higher risk, I would want a cheaper price. I would pay less because I have now subsidized my higher risk with a lower price. Okay, I'll give you another example. You see, because I was born to teach, you know. I was born to teach. But so we can follow. If I was to buy a 2-bedroom of same quality, same structure in Mona, because I perceive less risk in Mona than, let's say, Waterhouse, I would be willing to pay a higher price for the Mona house. I see you understand very well. Now, if I should then buy that same house in Waterhouse, because of the risk, I would say I'm paying less for this price in Waterhouse. Now, Jamaica has now been positioned as what we call a downtown destination because the tourists also have that perception. The tourist is saying that if the risk is perceived to be high, then the price must be lower to subsidize our perception of risk. So our economic activity is being generally affected not only directly by criminal activity, but indirectly by the perceptions of risk that's being associated. There are people coming on a cruise ship not willing to come off because of the assumption and the perception of risk. There are people in an all-inclusive not willing to come out because of the perception and the assumption of risk. Indeed, I myself will not find myself stopping and playing some football anywhere just because now, having seen what has happened, I now perceive risk. And now stop and play some domino just because. And there are communities where I'm not going to a party because you never know, based on the indiscipline of criminal activity. So you're basically not going nowhere. I'll come to that because I don't disagree with a lot of what Senator Sinclair has said. It must be the first that has happened. So that's why rain going to fall. So I see why we're targeting the guns in particular, because 80% or over 80% of the murders in our society has been created through guns. So it is reasonable for our government to say that if we're seeking to solve murder, then the chief implement in murder. I would presume that in the UK, they might be looking at knives, as knives have become one of the chief implements in murder there. But in Jamaica, disproportionately, Senator Sinclair, guns are the chief participant, the chief tool. Right, if you take out that 80%, you get 200. So, right? And then you give the victim a better chance if the intent of murder wasn't facilitated by something so efficient in creating murder. You could have run with a knife and all those things. So I understand. However, I also understand that there must be concern about the one heart fit all. And what you argued were two very different positions when it came to the expungement and the mandatory. And I'll give you a simple. A person should understand, in your opinion, that risk is high. And that risk is higher if there's no chance of expungement. If you commit a crime with a gun and you will have it for the rest of your life, that also increases the risk. So therefore, if you suggest, in your opinion, that 15 years is a risk deterrent, then you can equally say that to reduce the post-period risk. In my opinion. But we can reason because we have time. Rain never fall, we can't go nowhere. So therefore, yes. So what I'm saying is, I understand. I understand. Now, having Senator Golding come to the conclusion that guns must be targeted as a major tool of crime, then I expect in short order, Senator Braham, and I'm sure you agree with this, Senator Braham, that there will be an equally debated document, equally thick and equally publicized for a policy on boys and men in this society. Because while 80% is coming from guns, nearly 90% is coming from men. And so if we don't also seek to intervene within the circumstance of our boys, then we're going to always have that intent even when we try to control that tool. And so when I hear the Minister of Security try to say, Senator Bunting, that the money spent on social intervention and crime is still high, suggests, in his opinion, that the money has not been well spent, then I now extrapolate that to say a lot of money have been spent on the fighting of criminal activity through the Ministry of Security. And since the crime is still high, then maybe that money equally have not been well spent. It just don't make sense, the argument. But it gives me cause for concern that we will not be focusing on the human element, in particular our boys, and to then in opposite now seek to say, make sure that they don't survive certain altercations. Now, again, I agree, if it's in defense of your life, whether as a citizen or a police, you do have the right to take another life. And I would say the police should take the life if there's no other alternative. What I will warn the police, however, is not to take on this instruction that it costs too much for the injured, or not to call ambulance or send ambulance, because when Indicom come, this government is not going to hire your lawyer. So I'm saying to these policemen, be careful how you are encouraged to act in certain ways that you alone will have to answer when time has come. And so, Senator, I wish myself, just like you, that some of these criminals will be termed enemies of the state, even if we don't carry them to terrorists. The facilitators of criminal activity, the encouragers and organizers of our young people in selling murder and carrying out murderous activities, it is my dream that we will differentiate them and call them enemies of the state. I really do feel that way. And in calling them enemies of the state, treat them as such. Where the fear comes in some of the persons I've heard commenting, and in some of the persons on the opposition bench, and I'm sure in some of the persons on the government bench, is that some who are not enemies of the state will be treated as such under just this general system that exists. In my opinion, in my mind, the enemy of the state, the police should go to a panel of 5 judges and convince them that John Brown is an enemy of the state, and then treat John Brown accordingly. But I can give you a story of a goat farmer, and all of us as goat farmers are now worried, murdered in Westmoreland while tending to his goats. I'll give you another story. A goat farmer was shot and left for dead. He recovered. He later went back into goat farming as he had no other knowledge of no other thing. And he got a gun, a unlicensed gun. He was caught with that unlicensed gun, illegal possession. The police knew of his circumstance, that he was robbed. They knew of his circumstance, that he basically now was seeking to protect himself and his property, and knew of the biases in our society, that the general reality is all of us will not be qualified, especially by income, for a weapon. You think a 10 goat or 15 goat man can go to FLA because say, I am protecting property and life? When we have policemen, as Senator Bunting has stated, who based on where they live, could not get a license. Within Jamaica, and you stated that when you go and apply to FLA, they say, why you want a gun? You can reasonably say, because I live in Jamaica. You can reasonably state that. And yes, and when you, no, but when I, in my friends group, when a friend say he doesn't have a weapon, all the other friends are suggesting to him that he's stupid, that he needs to, quote unquote, have a chance, that if anything. So therefore, when a person who have a shop not considered equal to a man with a wholesale, or when a person who have a small herd not considered equal to a man with a large herd, you are, like myself, you are now saying to this person who is in need of protection, So I'm saying to you, firstly, that there should be easier methods for the lawful, even if not wealthy, or of reasonable circumstance, to be able to protect themselves and them property. Even if geofence to the areas that they have applied for that protection. So when you look at a little man who now feels that in order to protect himself, and Senator Golding, we know that in some communities man send for data. We know that one of the reasons why a little man now, I'll give you an example. And we haven't said enough about this. There's this fellow called Silk Boss. He's an artist. We saw a video of him being harassed, boxed and slapped as if he was a child by persons who were telling him he's not doing the right thing. Later being told that maybe he's buying weapons and buying guns and all of that. Box up bad. That boy have a strong heart and a strong mind. If him don't decide, say, him have to circle himself with some other people that make sure that that don't happen to him again. That boy might not want to ensure that him can protect himself in a certain way. And so if you don't allow the law abiding to be legal, you're opening up a space. And I feel that even when caught, there should be an appeal process for those who have special circumstance. Because this particular farmer who was shot and left for dead, I feel he has special circumstance. So I am not on the other side of town where said these murder for hire, kill and collect, smoke and forget, these gun-toting hoodlums who want to create mayhem and walk down to a gas station and fire shot, next thing explosion and nobody not even know what going on, walk down to a football match. I'm not for them. I'm saying within the circumstances, I have been to court to give evidence on a university student caught with a gun in his back, to give what they call character evidence. I think it's before sentencing. Well, he had the gun. But in this circumstance, it would be 15 years. In this circumstance, you'd have no basis to say, based on my previous realities, based on the fact that I'm in university, based on the fact that the gun have done nothing, I am not for 15 years. And the lady that Senator Sinclair spoke of would not have gotten the ability to become nothing to want expungement if the 15 years was applied. So there must be, in the same way, because I don't agree with the no expungement, because in the same way that 1, that 3, that 5 should have the basis of a special hearing. I think that is what we are worried about. That 12-year-old or 14-year-old who is a big criminal should go for 20, but that 14-year-old will find it around the road and then catch him. Him should have an appeal process, we believe, or I believe. And a structure that he can go through for that. The other thing is I don't understand what they call the amnesty. And I was discussing with Senator Allen, if the gun comes in and it has created a murder, the amnesty is for the possession, but the murder remains? Oh, so the conditions are only an unused gun can come for the amnesty? Oh, we're not reaching nowhere yet. Oh, so we're not thinking about it yet. Oh, they don't tell you about it yet. All I'm trying to say, yes, but let's look at it objectively. A gun illegal is often in pursuit of illegal activities. And that's why I make sure I say often, because my whole argument before was that there might be not in pursuit of illegal activity. To have an open amnesty, which nobody now bringing in a gun, right? Because all this money, 500,000 and all of that. Right. And they don't offer the same 500,000 for you to want to do a business. They don't offer the same 500,000 for you to want to start a shop. They don't offer the same 500,000 for you to want to farm some goat. But you're going to offer it for a youth who was creating mayhem before. Right? And that will make the youth look on and say, but this not seem fair. This seem like I should have participated. Because the man get the 500,000 and start the same farm that he wanted to start. But because he wasn't a participant in criminal activity before, he's then punished. But let us say that the gun committed a murder. What is the amnesty for? Whenever it comes, it must be clear if the amnesty is for the possession, but the murder is still a problem. And so, if a man bringing a gun, I'm assuming...
Look, if it is that the gun is found to have commit an offense, even if you are found with a gun,
yes,
and it is found to commit an offense, them can't charge you for that offense without more,
Oh. So now that you come, what we're going to do, we don't understand.
Suppose you are held.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Found and charged with illegal possession of this firearm.
Yes.
If they test the firearm and found that this weapon commit X amount of offense, that alone is not sufficient.
I am with you.
Okay.
Because you're now saying that legally, I can't tie you to the previous offenses because there is not sufficient evidence.
Without more.
I've learned from Senator Bram, he's a legal luminary, right? So,
Senator Bram can't help you with this one.
No, but I'm now not only in law. Should you receive government and public funds for having in your possession something will kill 4 people already? That is not just now saying I don't have enough evidence. That is a moral and ethical conversation. That if you turn in a weapon of mass destruction used in carrying out destruction, should you get my $500,000? Well, that was the last number I heard, 500, 300, and all kind of hundreds of $1,000. We had $20,000 gun. Now, I'm saying to you that before we put these things out in the space, that we are going to... You alone put it out 4 times today. Alone. Today alone. Right? The Prime Minister himself said that we're going to pay... In February. Yes, in February. Well, that need to be discussed, because if murder gun come in, I can't agree that he should get money for that gun. So basically the only way you can have amnesty, you're suggesting, because if robbery gun come in, if in the pursuit of rape gun come in, those persons can't get my money, my taxes. So the only gun we can have amnesty is new gun, I'm assuming. Because all guns used in the pursuit of negativity should be disqualified on an ethical basis from being rewarded by government. And right. Not facing it even though you have committed the activities. Oh, yes, 500,000 don't compare to the 15 years probabilities that face these people. The other thing is, yes, the Prime Minister himself. Yes, I have to be careful because you have a way of saying he never really said money, he said cash. That's how the Jamaica Labour Party argues. He said check. He did say money. Right. The other thing I heard both you and Senator Scott Motley speak to is that foreign policy and foreign interaction need to be reviewed. I am calling on the Black Caucus in particular in the United States to intervene and pressure for there to be intervention on behalf of countries like ours. As I say, we do not make guns. But at least to put rules in place that we can trace who bought them and send them here. To put rules, when they say Black Lives Matter, it can't be Americans only. We are losing thousands of our people to weapons of destruction, not bought here, not created here, and not made here. That is, may I come to your conference now? Come make sure the people understand. No, I have another one. All I'm saying is that if we have 145 ports that we have unofficial identified, and we're finding difficulty economically and otherwise, human resources to man them, and we know that a major source of these weapons is from the United States, or some of them is from the United States. As Senator Scott Motley stated, and as you stated, that there needs to be intervention but Senator Scott Matley has asked for the Prime Minister to act with powers that are seldom granted to countries of our size and income, that he should demand of the United States. And unfortunately, I don't believe that most of our prime ministers, unless they have had some personal ability to attract attention and power, is granted that ability to demand. So I'm suggesting that the government works through the persons who are more aligned to us based on certain realities, like the Black Caucus, to say to them on our behalf, let us see what strategies can be used to increase risk to those who are supplying the weapons to our society. The video I watch, I hear people saying is a SLR, the man gone with. That is, Senator Bunting, did you see that video at the football match? Yes. The assumptions is that it was a high-powered SLR that the person had. Now, how could a SLR get into the hands a military-grade weapon? And how can we not say John Brown bought this SLR if we get that into our and then go after John Brown with equal effort? The final thing I want to speak to is risk. The risk is not only the severity of punishment, it's the probability of punishment. If the probability is low, the severity isn't of high consideration. If you're not going to catch me, no matter how severe it is, if I don't perceive it likely to be caught, then I am not going to be of high risk. What we have in our society now is a great unlikelihood that they are caught. And if so, is an even greater unlikelihood that they are convicted. When we look at the numbers that we have before us, the conviction rates are low and the clear-up rates are low. And so therefore, when we have a society that the criminal feels, all right, I'm going to go back over it. I'm saying that the risk is not only on the severity. You have corrected me to say the severity was low. So you have corrected that by saying 15 years. So you have corrected the low severity. But you have not in any way corrected the low probability of punishment, because we have not had an increase in conviction, an increase in clear-up rate, and an increase in the probability that the criminal is going to be charged and sentenced. So that being the case, I think it is necessary for the public to understand that their expectations should not be exorbitant without those other things that you recommended, Senator Sinclair. Like, for example, I think we should have a Cornwall, Middlesex, and Surrey division of the DPP, so that we don't have to be sending man from town and him have to delay every minute and all of those things until the witness can't bother. All of those things have affected. So therefore, you should have the overarching DPP, but you have a deputy DPP and him have a unit down in Middlesex, a unit down in Cornwall, and a unit down in Surrey. And the understanding of the realities, as you're shaking your head, sometimes you agree with me. Ideas, yes. So and to properly, and to properly, that's for part of ideas. Yes. But Senator Sinclair, if we don't move to the lack of delay for readiness, especially from the DPP side, we're often going to have the cases fall apart in short order. And so to that extent, I believe that we have to do that. I think also, especially noting that the no bail is coming soon behind, that, the no bail vision, I heard, is that we should also consider a maximum delay on the part of government, that the DPP shouldn't be able to go to court 6-7 times to say we are not ready. That after a certain amount of time, some intervention must happen for the person to get a reasonable trial. So what we're saying, senators, is that you should have a system to suggest that the DPP must be ready within X time to try a case, because it then becomes very unreasonable on what you said, that if I'm in there for 3 years, it don't get minus from my 15 years. But worse, if me get not guilty, I don't get but nothing for my 3 years. So therefore, we have to look at how we ensure that until guilty, we don't punish our citizens. Because there are going to be some found not guilty. There are going to be some, as you said, found not guilty because they were coerced. Is that what you said it was? That they were forced. So if he don't get a trial till 5 years, that he already served a 5-year sentence. There are some that's going to be found not guilty because it's not above reasonable doubt. You stated that, beyond reasonable doubt, that the possession and the intent and the knowledge was there. The 5 years, so I'm suggesting that we must add those things. And you made a last point, rehabilitation. Unfortunately, we don't have the prisons built for rehabilitation. We have the prisons built for punishment. And those prisons are overcrowded.
I hope that they ask Mr. Charles for
no, they can't go back for prison. Politically, they said they didn't want no prison. So maybe it was true, it was from the Queen. No, that is from the King. They might want the prison. So it's a different thing. But we must also look at that. Because with the age of our young boys participating in criminal activity, 15 years might give a 29-year-old. 15 years might give a 35-year-old. Without the rehabilitation, you then have a person physically able and possibly better trained to come out and participate in criminal activity. So I join you, sir, Senator Sinclair, in calling for a immediate review and likely document and rule upon the methods and strategies of rehabilitation because of the young age of the participants that we are having in our criminal participation. I see 16 and 15 and 14 and now with and lower, even lower. And with some of our children cannot be found because of this and gone. We can expect that. If you start to let out angry men at 35 into the society because they were not given a fair shake or whatever, is a bigger problem that we will have to face. So while I find that those who are already criminal elements should be given the harshest of treatment, and if you said 20, I wouldn't have a problem. I beg that we have within it a special appeal clause for the sentencing, based on specific and certain circumstances. With that, sir, I thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator Crawford. Senator Sophia Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am just going to make a brief intervention. I know that we are hoping to get out, and the staff especially, to ensure that we prepare for the impending weather. But considering the nature of the bill and the discussions that we have had, and my personal background, I could not miss the opportunity to contribute to this very significant piece of legislation. And at the crux of it is behavior change at the end of the day. Reading from the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons. In this regard, the proposed framework provides for offenses and penalties that are appropriately dissuasive and commensurate in respect of prohibited weapons, including mandatory minimum terms of imprisonment for particularly egregious offenses. And I focus on appropriately dissuasive. And so there's no question in my mind. I will not go through the statistics. I will not belabor the points that have been made in terms of the situation that Jamaica faces right now with respect to gun-related crimes. But to recognize and bring focus to one clause that I think that we probably should really pay particular attention to, and that is Clause 18. Offense of seeking benefit, etc., from professing to having or have access to a firearm. A person shall not, in order to gain an unlawful benefit or cause apprehension to any person, profess to have or to have access to a firearm. And it reads on with respect to whoever contravenes that and the felonies. Imprisonment for not exceeding 5 years in a parish court and not exceeding 15 years in a circuit court. Mr. President, I bring attention to this because of the emphasis on behavior change and the impact of what we see in terms of the audiovisual profession and the depictions that we see in our public spaces at times that children and young people are exposed to with respect to what we see as sometimes entertainment, as sometimes what we use to bring to attention our prowess and our almost wanting to intimidate others. When you see in the videos the brandishing of the guns and the ammunition and the threats that are associated with that. And I bring this clause to our attention because I am hoping that it will be a deterrent to especially the persons who are responsible for the manufacturing and the production of these audiovisual materials especially, that targets our young people, that seeks to embolden and give precedence of acceptance of this type of depiction in our culture. It is damaging. It is something that we need to recognize has long-term effects. We all know that I am very much about the psychosocial interventions that needs to happen to prevent crime and violence and to prevent us having to implement what we're laying down on this piece of legislation. But desperate times calls for desperate measures. And in so doing, I had to add my voice to the efforts of behavior change, and particularly this clause as it may apply to the professing and brandishing of weaponry in our society. And with that, President, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Longmore.
Can I get the lectern, please?
Minister Samuda.
What I was about to... Mr. President, I thank colleagues for their contributions to this very important piece of legislation. I believe everyone should have got their respective copies of the amendments, and I'll save the discussion on this particular amendments for committee. But just to note that I think this piece of legislation is important. It has benefited from significant discourse in the Joint Select Committee. There is one point of departure, and I think in setting the context, there's one point of departure I have from my colleague and friend Senator Scott Motley, is the frame, the concern over that, when the amendments came and whether it is rushed. If we think of the context of what we're trying to stem here, it is two numbers I think we need to consider, whether we consider it a rush. I believe it's 30 years late, so I think we've had this conversation going around in a circle for 30 years. So I don't think the conversation and the positioning of society and the concept can be disputed. But we started the Joint Select Committee on February 10th. That's 225 days ago. I appreciate that there would have been some last-minute jostling, and even with Section 19 we'd have seen something today that we, several reviews before haven't picked up. But 225 days at our 25-year daily murder average of 3.42 a day tells you the cost of the time that we have spent. Now, that's a good segue into the first point I think that I will take on, which is the period of mourning. The issue isn't whether or not, to my mind, we have acknowledged that we have a deep crisis. The issue isn't whether or not we've paused and reflected. I can recall in the early 90s when the murder rate just started to go up, and I was in prep school. We were called to a day of prayer for 2 children who had been murdered at the time. We've had calls to action by varying religious leaders. We've had days and weekends of prayer and much fasting, and we've built even, I know Mayor Williams is outside, but we've even built a monument for children who have been hurt or been murdered rather in this country. I don't think there is a lack of recognition, a lack of prayer, a lack of mourning per se. I think what has been absent, certainly if we look at the process of legislation, has been fit for purpose legislation, appropriately funded operationalization of that legislation, if we're to be totally honest, over the last 25 years, has been inadequate. So I just wanted to start from that point. Mr. President, the amendments being moved along with the bill being debated are principally to address the strengthening of the operational issues such as those made to Clause 101, which speaks to trial, punishment, proof, and records, and to ensure that consequential amendments are made to those pieces of legislation. In addition to amendments, an amendment to Clause 5 has been made to correct the disparity in sentencing provisions relating to possession simpliciter versus possession with intent to injure at Clause 15. The provision has also been amended to separate injury to person and serious damage to property, to allow for separate treatment of the offences and the associated penalties. Therefore, the penalty provision in respect of injury to person now reflects that upon conviction before a circuit court to imprisonment for life for such a term not less than 15 years. The penalty provision dealing with serious damage to property reflects a term imprisonment not exceeding 5 years. 15 years rather. Mr. President, I have taken note of the contributions of my colleagues, both yesterday and today, and the quality of the common contributions demonstrates the thoughtfulness and thoroughness that I believe this review chamber should demonstrate all the time. It also reflects the benefit of the Joint Select Committee. I took the opportunity to consult with the FLA this morning. I think statistics are important, and I think based on the contribution of colleague and friend Senator Bunting, that some clarity had to be provided in the context of his contribution yesterday. Now I know I'm getting old and sometimes my memory will fail me, but I'm sure my memory is not incorrect, former Minister Bunting, that you were Minister between 2012 and 2016 February. The last amendment to the Firearms Act came on the 12th, was gazetted on the 12th day of February 2016, right before change in government. That was I believe, the final act gazetted before the closing of that session of Parliament. One of the sections that it sought to amend of the current act was Section 29. So it reads, Section 29 of the Principal Act is amended by deleting subsection
7.
Now, Section 29 of the current Act, colleagues, refers to, subject to this, and I'll read it, subject to this section and to Sections 28 and 37, grant of any license, certificate, or permit shall be in the discretion of the authority. At 29.4 says, firearm import permit, a firearms user's license, a firearm user's special permit, a firearm user's employee certificate, a certificate issued under paragraph 1 of subsection 2 and section 20 shall be granted by the authority only if he is satisfied that the applicant has a good reason for importing, purchasing, acquiring, or having in his possession or ammunition in respect of which his application is made. Now, that wasn't amended then. That's not the clause that was amended. So the decision of the then government was to leave it. The other thing that was left was a section which reads, under 29, provided further that no firearm user's license, firearm user's special permit, or firearm user's employee certificate shall be granted until the applicant therefore has, at B, satisfied the authority that he has made adequate provision for keeping the firearm in respect of which his application is made in a secure place when it is not being carried or used in accordance with the license. So what this means, what this means, right? So the letter that was read related to the police, I was very concerned about the language as it was put. So we looked at the last series of, because I don't have the name of the officer to which you refer, but we looked at the last series of rejections and what it was related to. All of the ones that spoke to address are in relation to the investigation done not just by the FLA, but also by the NIB and IPROB, as it is done for police officers, related to the security of the storage of the facility. So just to put members at ease that it has nothing to do with where you live, it has the ability to secure the space. Now, beyond that, why I brought up the dates, Minister, that you were, no, but why I brought up the dates that Minister Bunting was there in his time, is that in 2011, October 2011, as a part of the force orders, keep and care, so not just for private weapons, the keep and care policy of the JCF was changed. It was changed 2011, and it was not changed subsequently. It was changed in October 2011. Minister Bunting had 4 years, 1 month to change it back if he disagreed with it. He took an amendment here, which I'm about to speak to the specific amendment. But the keep and care, which is related to the government's weapons in this case, that an assessment must be done similarly for you to be approved for keep and care, and based on officers who live in particularly volatile areas, depending on the assessment, in some cases it was found that they were in more danger by having it on them because they didn't have adequate security for the weapon while they were in the space. So the reality is, the address was taken into consideration both by the keep and care policy and indeed is taken into consideration by the law that Minister Bunting did not choose to amend. Now let me tell you the clause that he did choose to amend. No, let me tell you, the clause he did choose to amend, which I found very interesting because I said, it's just to make sure we're on the same page. Section 29 of Principal Act is amended by deleting subsection 7. Subsection 7, colleagues, says where the application for a license or certificate is refused, the applicant may, on the presentation of a certificate to that effect from the authority, to obtain from the collector of taxes a refund of the duty paid in respect of the application. So not only did he not correct the address issue that he raised, he also took away the ability to get back the refund with that application. So, Mr. President, it is a little ridiculous that it was brought up in this way. No, it does. No, it is not. It doesn't. It doesn't. No, that is the facts. That is the facts. Beyond that, Mr. President. Mr. President, protection, President. Apparently, it sounds like I need it. No, it is the reality. It is the reality.
Senator Bunting. Senator Bunting.
Beyond that, it is important to note that since 2016, 95% of police applicants have received their firearm license. 95%. 95%. So there is not wholesale discrimination against members of the security forces. No. Persons who do not receive their firearm permit have not satisfied the basics of the application process. That is the reality. That is the reality. That is the reality. Now, you know, in the debates which will come on the regulations, because they were read to me, but I wanted to have the printout, we will also look at 4 similar such letters, 2015 and 2014. That, my friends and colleagues, is the reality. So this could have been cleared up in 2015, going into 2016, and you chose not to. The only clause you chose to deal with there was the one related to the refund. That's the facts. That is the facts. That is the facts. You just don't like the facts. No, you don't want me to go with something better. Believe me. Believe me. So let's leave that alone for today. Believe me, leave it alone for today. The other points raised, and Senator Crawford raised the issue, I think Senator Bunting raised the issue in terms of certainty of being caught. And that is indeed an issue. Our clear-up rate has been a concern for a very long time. But what was not brought up in the points is the fact that for those who have been caught, the penalty did not match the crime. And this bill deals with that issue. It also did not bring up the fact that for those who are caught, our recidivism rate has been between 40 and 70%, depending on which classification you look at. Now, it also didn't bring up the point that 3.5 years was the average time spent for such crimes. So if you have a 50% recidivism rate, half of those persons that come out every 3.5 years are reoffending. And based on the statistics, for the number of percentage, 85% for murder, 70% for for robbery, varying percentages in terms of the use of the gun in these crimes. There's a high likelihood that those who are coming out after 3.5 years, 50% of them will be back, and a sizable percentage of that would have committed crimes with the gun. Now, there's also other studies, Mr. President, that have spoken to the length of time required for rehabilitation. Now, I've had more exposure than most to the gaps and the gaping holes in the capacity of our correction service. There needs to be significant investment in our correction service if we're to break the back of the crime monster holistically. Right? There's no two ways about that. But there are several studies, and Senator Longmore can tell you, that the time it takes for rehabilitation, the time it takes for re-socialization, the time it takes for treating of many of the mental issues that many of these people face, 3.5 years does not give you that chance of success. That's also an element that hasn't been examined here today. Reality, Mr. President, this bill has the support of the members of the government. It has the support, apparently, the members of the opposition, certainly in the lower house. I look forward this afternoon. Sorry? Well, she's not in the lower house. Well, we will see. We will see. But, Mr. President, the reality is our gun crime problem for the last 30 or so years is such that if we were to look statistically, the last time we were safe statistically was in the 1980s, and the last time before that was the 1960s. So if you have a problem that has persisted for 40 years and your sentencing has not matched the crime, and we've continued just with a rota pushing out young men to go and recommit the crime, and then wondering why we have these results, have to do something different. The other point was made is that you have to invest significantly in ensuring your clear operating increases. We have been doing so. Mr. President, it is why Senator Sinclair would have spoken to the investment in the police capacity, in mobility, and certainly in their police station space. It is why this government has invested heavily in the ballistics capacity of IFLSM. It is why we have invested to operationalize the DNA bill also passed by Senator Bunting. It is why we have invested heavily in the fingerprint capacity of our security forces. We have invested heavily in intelligence capacity. But there's an area that we've invested in heavily which has been criticized. The reality is border security will play a major role in us stemming the inflow of guns. Now, if you understand the nature of Jamaica's waterways and you understand what 145 unpoliced ports means, the sheer cost of protecting our waters and protecting this access point is significant. The responsibility of your border security, certainly in your waters and bordering international waters, would be the responsibility of the JDF. Now, yes, we bought ships. Yes, we've bought police patrol boats. Yes, we've bought drones. We have invested significantly in the capacity. But if you have an assessment that you require X and you've invested and purchased 20 or 30% of the equipment required, it will take a lot longer and more money to do it. But when the investment comes, we can't similarly on one side say we need to protect our borders, but when the investment comes into that space, it is criticized. Can't quarrel about the capital investment into the army, which is tasked with this defense, and then when you're 1/3 the way down in doing what we all agree we need to do, it is criticized. You can't have it both ways. It is why this government invested what it did in its border security and will continue to do so once the fiscal space is available. Mr. President, there is a flow. Earlier in the year, the government of Jamaica launched its Get the Guns campaign to purchase information about guns. That launch, the Prime Minister said, a law is coming that is going to bring about particular penalties. It is time to rid yourself of firearms in the space. For the information, the government will make particular payments to you. Government says, okay, Get the Guns will come, the law will pass. Then we'll even give you another opportunity for those who don't want to hold onto the weapons. We will allow an amnesty so that those who do not have criminal intent with the weapons have a mechanism to rid themselves of such. In the launch of the armed gun amnesty in South Africa, Nelson Mandela said, the strife among ourselves wastes our energy and destroys our unity. My message to those of you involved in this battle of brother against brother is this: take your guns, your knives, and throw them into the sea. Amnesty as a concept for ridding society of weapons is not new and has had varying levels of success in different territories. However, when you look at the cultural similarities, we believe the cultural similarities show that there is a route to success when we look at the South African model. And it did have relative success in their space. Mr. President, there is not much more to say this afternoon. I commend the bill to colleagues and ask that the bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Minister Samuda. The question is that the bill, the firearms prohibition, restriction, and regulation be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Repeal and Replace the Firearms Act to provide more particularly for the prohibition, restriction, or regulation as may be appropriate of firearms and ammunition, and for connected matters, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Minister, agreement of opposition business concerning.
So we have the amendments which have been agreed. So I guess the clauses that do not have disagreement, we can take en masse.
No, amendments proposed.
Proposed. Language that has been proposed that meets the agreement from both sides.
Mr. Chairman.
So let me send it a bunch. As I'm going along, just indicate to me where you have a difficulty.
Right, but just to make it easy for you, it's the clauses that for which amendments are proposed would be correct. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I will put clause 1. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Clause 2, there is a proposed amendment.
Yes. Chairman, the clause 2 is delete the semicolon appearing at the end of paragraph H of the definition of prohibited weapon and substitute therefore a comma and insert the following words of the back up to the margin. And for the purposes of this definition, missile means a weapon capable of self-propelled flight that is designed to deliver an explosive payload.
So I can put the amendment. Those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Against? So I put clause 2 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I think I can put clauses 4 and 5. Sorry.
3 and 4.
Yeah, I'll get there. Everybody is more awake than me. I will put clauses 3 and 4. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. There is an amendment to clause 5. Minister?
Chairman, delete. The amendment is proposed as delete subsection 2 and substitute therefore the following. 2. A person who contravenes subsection 1 commits a felony and shall on conviction therefore be before a circuit court be sentenced to imprisonment for such term not less than 15 years nor more than 25 years as the court considers appropriate.
Chairman, I just want to place on record my opposition to all mandatory sentence in this bill, and I'm doing so here, and you can take that further where mandatory sentences arise.
The record will indicate that Senator Brown is opposed to all clauses which involve the imposition of a mandatory minimum sentence. Correct?
And I join the minutes, sir. I'm totally in support of the bill except for that.
And the same would apply to Senator Scott Motley.
Yeah, I have just a clarification to ask. So this amendment is addressing the inconsistency between this clause and clause 15, which was pointed out first by the opposition leader and then by Senator Scott Motley today?
I believe so, yes.
The amendment
between in clause 5, you're aligning it with this amendment as tabled here is bringing it essentially is aligning the penalties with those in clause 15.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So you can at least say you've accepted
Congrats.
the suggestion.
Thank you very much. So I put the amendment. Those in favor? I put clause 5 as amended. Those in favor? I put clause 5 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
I put clauses 6 to 14. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Minister, there is an amendment to clause 15.
Yes, Chairman. The proposed amendment reads, delete subsections 1 and 2 and substitute therefore the following. A person in possession of any firearm or ammunition with intent by means to A, injure any person or enable any person to injure a person, or B, cause serious damage to property or enable any other person to cause serious damage to property. Whether or not any injury to a person or damage to property, as the case may be, has been caused, commits a felony. And 2, a person who commits a felony under section 1A shall be liable on conviction, therefore, before a circuit court to imprisonment for life and notwithstanding the provisions of the Parole Act concerning time within which an offender shall be eligible for parole, upon sentencing a person convicted of a felony under subsection 1A, the court shall specify a term of imprisonment not less than 20 years that the person shall serve before being eligible for parole. Or B, subsection 1B shall be liable upon conviction, therefore, before a circuit court to imprisonment for such term not less than 15 years, nor more than 25 years as the court considers as appropriate.
So our members should have heard the amendment. Those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Against? The amendment is carried. I put clause 15 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put clauses 16 to 18. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? There is an amendment to clause 19.
Chairman, the proposed amendment reads as follows. 1, delete subsection 3 and substitute therefore following. 3, a person who surrenders a firearm or ammunition in compliance with an order made under this section shall not be prosecuted for having been in possession of that firearm or ammunition as the case may be contrary to this act. 2, delete subsection 4. And 3, renumber subsection 5 as subsection 4. In that subsection as renumbered, delete the words except in the case of a firearm returned under subsection 4. And yes, Senator Bunting, this was in line with the recommendation of Senator Scott
This
Motley.
is correcting the absurdity pointed out by Senator Scott Motley in this clause earlier today.
This is correcting an issue that seems to have missed the entire Parliament and upper house, but caught by Senator Scott Motley. You mean the lower house? But yes, Chairman, I put the recommended amendment.
Okay. Members should have heard the proposed amendment to clause 19, which I put. Those in favor? Aye. Against? And I put clause 19 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. I put clauses 20
to 32.
You must look especially sleepy today, President.
It's just people are overactive. I put clause 20 to 32. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. There is an amendment to clause 33.
Thank you, Chairman. In subsection 2, delete the words the felony of trafficking in the firearms, ammunition, or other category of conventional arms as the case may be, and substitute therefore the words a felony.
Members should have heard the amendment to clause 33, which I put. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 33 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. I put clauses 34 to 100.
Yes, President. Yes, Chairman. As
those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Ayes have it. There's an amendment to clause 101.
Chairman, the amendment reads as follows. In the marginal note, 1 in the marginal note, delete the word punishment and substitute therefore the words trial punishment. 2 in subsection 4, insert next after the words signed by the words or under the authority of, and B, delete the words director or chief executive officer as the case may be wherever they may appear, and substitute therefore in each case the words signatory. 3, insert next after subsection 6 the following subsections. Where an offense under this act is triable in a parish court, the offense shall, unless otherwise specifically provided, be triable summarily. 8, unless otherwise specifically provided in this act, where the penalty provided for an offense against this act is A is imprisonment for life, notwithstanding anything in the Parole Act, the court shall specify a term not less than 15 years that the offender shall serve before being eligible for parole. Or B, prescribes a minimum term of imprisonment notwithstanding anything in the Parole Act, the court shall specify a term not less than 10 years that the offender shall serve before being eligible for parole. That's it, Chairman.
Members would have heard the amendment proposed for 101. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put the clause 101 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put clauses, ayes have it. I put clauses 103 to
102, Chairman.
No, man. You agree to 10. Of course. Yes, yes, yeah. You're perfectly right. Senator Morris from Montego Bay. You are perfectly right, Senator Morris from Montego Bay. I put clauses 102 to 117. Those in favor?
Aye.
Come again? I'm sorry, I think we have an amendment.
113.
113, okay, thank you very much. So I put clauses 102 to 113.
112.
I know, Ms. Cohen. to 112. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? So there is an amendment to 113.
Chairman, the recommended amendment reads as follows: delete the word 7 and substitute therefore with the word 5.
Oh, yes, I have it. Thank you very much. Members would have heard the amendment. Those in favor?
Aye.
That is in relation to the amendment. I put clause 13 as amended. Those in 113. Look here, man. 113 as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good. Now, let's go. So, all right. So I can put the schedules 1 to 5.
Well,
because there's an amendment to the 6th schedule, no, sir?
Chairman, have you put 114 to 117 here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, you can go to 1st to 5th schedule, Chairman.
So I put the 1st to the 5th schedule. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Now there's an amendment to the 6th schedule.
Chairman, the recommended amendment is in relation to the description of the offense under section 33(2). Insert next after the word ammunition the words without authorization.
Members would have heard the amendment to the 6th schedule. Those in favor?
Aye.
And I put the 6th schedule as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And the 7th schedule, there is also an amendment there too.
Chairman, the recommended amendment reads as follows. 1. Insert next after the amendments relating to the Gunpowder and Explosives Act the following amendment to the Larceny Act.
Thank you very much.
Which reads, the Larceny Act delete subsection 2 of section 4 and substitute therefore the following. In this section, firearm and imitation firearm have the meanings assigned to them in section 2 of the Firearms Act, and 2, and in item 3 of the amendments relating to the Offences Against a Person Act, delete the words 10 years and substitute therefore the words 15 years. And 3, insert next after the amendments relating to the Offences Against a Person Act the following amendment to the Parole Act, which reads, the Parole Act delete paragraph A of section 6(4)(a).
Thank you very much, Minister. So I put the proposed amendment to the 7th schedule. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I put the 7th schedule as amended. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much, members. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? The ayes have it. How many do you have? 17. The question, members, the question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee with 17 amendments. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 17 amendments. Minister?
Mr. President, I ask for a third reading of the bill. I ask for a third reading of the bill.
Those in favor? Against? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Repeal and Replace the Firearms Act to provide more particularly for the prohibition, restriction, or regulation as may be appropriate of firearms and ammunition and for connected matters read a third time and passed.
Right. I think it's opposed, yes. Senator Hill, I understand you have some very short bit of work to do. One minute, members. May I just thank the technical persons who were here for the. Hope to see you all soon. Minister Hill.
Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of a bill entitled An Act to amend the Special Economic Zones Act, notice of which I gave earlier, and also for me to take it through all the concluding stages.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Proceed, Minister Hill.
May I have the lectern, please? Thank you.
Lectern, you're called for.
That's a given. Mr. President, this is, as you said, a short piece of legislation. But before I start, I want to just say thanks to the technical teams who helped with this. It's really related to our international arrangements and as usual, very important. So the technical teams from my minister, the Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, the technical team from the Special Economic Zone Authority, and from the Ministry of Finance, they all helped to make this a reality in a relatively short period of time. So I thank them very much. The matter before us today is the amendment of the Special Economic Zones Act to ensure its conformity with international standards of tax transparency, as well as to improve the efficiency in administration of the regime. Profit shifting, Mr. President, from one jurisdiction to another is a global problem for which it has been determined that we need a global solution. The global solution proposed by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, requires that there are increased substantial requirements in relation to the treatment of income-generating activities in our special economic zones to ensure that there is reduced opportunities for revenue leakage locally or shifting of profits internationally. The Special Economic Zone Act is therefore being amended to ensure that it meets these substance requirements as well as to address administrative issues which have been identified. The CEZA is the successor to the Jamaica Exports Free Zone Act, 1982, which was repealed effective 1st of August 2016. Jamaica's Special Economic Zone Authority initially passed the test with respect to the preferential tax regimes by European Union in their assessment carried out in 2018. The SEZ regime was thereafter the subject of a review by the Forum of Harmful Tax Practices, FHTP, under the OECD in 2020, and a determination was made that modifications need to be made to the regime in order for the SEZ to be compliant with international obligations. The FHTP noted in its review that Jamaica had certain activities operating in its SEZ which would have to comply with substance requirements. These substance requirements are that the preferential treatment of tax benefits must be given to core income-generating activities undertaken by the taxpayer in the jurisdiction, and this is usually evidenced by two specific requirements. The first is an adequate number of full-time employees, which is clearly very good for the Jamaican economy. And second, adequate operational expenditure to undertake the core income earning activity. In other words, you can't just earn income and don't spend money. You must spend money in the economy to make sure you earn income. Those were the two main requirements. It should be noted that the SEZ's policy objective was always to increase the productive capacity of the economy, a very key objective, as the development of the regime was targeted at activities with economic substance that will generate substantial employment, provide knowledge transfer and linkages with our local businesses. This requirement, while already existing as part of the administration of the SEZ, needs to be explicitly stated in the legislation. The amendments that are proposed will therefore insert these substantial requirements into the legislation to provide that only companies from which core income is generated may be allowed to operate in the zone. In other words, no fly-by-night. Additionally, intellectual property activities, and this is the main issue, have been deemed to create increased potential for harm since there are no special requirements to govern these activities. As such, Jamaica has opted to remove such activities from being carried out within the zone until Jamaica creates a fulsome intellectual properties regime related to activities within the zone. The Jamaica Intellectual Property Organization, the Ministry, the SEZ are all working to make sure we do this, but until then we have to do the following. There are carefully no entities in the zone which will be negatively impacted by the provision. However, if such an entity is discovered, a provision has been made in the legislation to allow for continued operation until March 31, 2023. Further, the amendments seek expressly to clarify that the rate of taxation from distribution by way of dividends paid out of profits is 0%. This needs to be concretized so that the administration and policy arrangement currently in effect be compliant with what the needs, with what the requirements are. Further, a few editorial corrections have been made by way of policy and administration. However, the rate had not been inserted in the Act. This omission has caused confusion on the part of many potential investors, and as such, the amendments also seek to correct this error and others of this nature. The bill, clause by clause. Clause 1, short title and commencement. The clause provides for the short title and commencement of the Act. Clause 2, the interpretation. The clause provides for a definition for the term intellectual property activities. Very important and the key part of this amendment. Amendment of Section 41 of the Principal Act. Section 41 of the Act currently provides a list of activities that are not allowed in the zone. Intellectual property activities have now been incorporated as one of such activity excluded. To insert a new subsection 3 to allow for transitional period March 21, 2023 for a developer or occupant carrying intellectual property activities. Clause 4, amendment to the first schedule to the Principal Act. These are the amendments which are made to improve the administration of the Act. The amendments include, first, in paragraph 4.2 subsection A and paragraph 4.2 subsection E, the word business is inserted to properly include the work done by business processing outsourcing, rather business processing operations on zones to facilitate their benefits of the income tax provided in the Act. Second, to provide clarity on the rate to be given on dividends. Third, in paragraph 4, subsection 7, the words rental earning activities are deleted and replaced with the words zone-related activities other than as a zone user. The zone-related activities rather than a zone user. The zone-related activities might actually involve activities for people who are not in the zone, because the zone can purchase services and so on from outside. It can't export its goods to outside. So you have those related services, but the people who might provide from outside might not be zone users. Yes. If you're outside, you get no tax benefit at all, and that's why we want to clarify it. And you can imagine the OECD are particular about that. They don't want any leakage across the fence. And intellectual property provided, in their view, until we readjust the legislation, a source of leakage that was not controllable easily. So, in paragraph 4.7, as I said, the words rental earning activities are deleted and replaced with the words zone-related activities other than as a zone user, to provide that where a developer or occupant conducts other activities that are not zone-related activities, a new company will be required to be established to conduct those activities. And the fourth was the correction of the typographical errors. Clause 5. Amendment to the fourth schedule to the Principal Act. The fourth schedule provides for the eligibility criteria which the authority applies for entities operating in the zone. The schedule is being amended to provide that the substantial activities carried out by the developer or occupant of the zone must be its core income generating activities, and the criteria to be satisfied in this regard. Very important. So if you're a master developer who is really there to develop the place for rental, that will be your main business. Over time you may have cash that you invest elsewhere, but that's not your main business. A provision is also inserted to provide that all developers and occupants operating in zones must comply with the substance requirements on or being March 31, 2023. Memorandum of objects and reasons. The memorandum stipulates that the key objectives of the Act are. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for that succinct opening.
Staff are excellent at it, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope you're in the same mood as you were in the committee. But suffice it to say that it might have been succinct, but it was speedily read. And so there's a few questions we want to pose as comments. When I see anything having to do with the Special Economic Zone Act, the name Anthony Hilton, George Hilton, MP, Western St. Andrew comes to mind. He was the one who pushed for the logistics hub. He was criticized, as usual, by the then opposition, chastised. But today, the logistics hub is up and running. Let's give credit where it is due. Mr. President, the minister spoke to tax obligation. People must pay taxes. And I wish to ask the minister whether or not this legislation is consistent with the following views expressed in June of this year. Read the SES. They will get 50 years tax-free benefits. No taxes. No income taxes for 50 years. In contract by lease, you'll get this wonderful piece of land, he said. Now, is that, who said it? Let me check and see. Oh, yeah, the Minister of Industry and Commerce. Who is that again? Who is that again? No, I am going to finish. No. I want to know whether that is consistent with this piece of legislation. Having regard for the fact that a cabinet colleague with portfolio responsibility for taxes came out and said no such thing. So who is right? Senator Hill or Minister Clark? It will be helpful for us because certainly these people who are coming to the business need to know if it's 50 years tax-free or what the Minister of Finance said that will apply. The second thing I want to raise, Minister, is that in 2017, January thereabout, with much fanfare, the SE, the economic zone, a MOU was entered into between the government of Jamaica and Singapore. Just at about the time when the 5 in 4 was being developed. Well, we know where the 5 in 4 has gone. It has been an illusion, not even pursued, and certainly not attained. I want to know what has become of that MOU and whether or not it has been renewed. Because given the fanfare of the Prime Minister then and the Minister Vaz and all of those, Jamaica was expected to get massive benefits. And we haven't heard anything since. Is it a case that that MOU went to the morgue? May it please you, Mr. President, we will support the bill nevertheless.
Just in your closing, Minister,
No, thank you very much, Senator Brown. Senator Bunting.
Just could you give us some additional information? Since this Special Economic Zone Act has been passed, could you give us a sense of the scale of the take-up of the benefits? You know, how many zones or how many entities, what sort of economic activities being generated through this now? And, you know, if you can tell us, for example, how many persons employed, etc. But specifically, I recall one early potential zone developer, somebody who had expressed an interest, wanted to know where there were energy-intensive activities, whether in manufacturing or chemicals or so on, whether a particular zone could have had an electricity generating entity within the zone, whereas instead of tenants just paying rent for a warehouse shell, they would get full services, including utilities. But the question was, would this potentially violate the JPS monopoly and distribution that currently exists? So why I ask is because you change it from rental earning activities to zone-related activities, and I wondered if this broader definition would include a situation where a developer could put in generating facilities in a zone and all the tenants in the zone get that cheaper energy from the developer of the zone.
Mr. President, I appreciate the queries and questions. And yes, MP Tony Hilton was the one who led this early in the game. There were some hiccups. We will not forget Crown and Anchor. Those things happen, but along the way, these things happen. So we have to give credit across the board for these activities. And Senator Brown, on the 50-year issue and the no tax, in fact, both ministers are right. I'll tell you why. Because I answered it. I answered it to Senator Bunting. We have places to answer colleagues, Senator Brown. So we do that there. Here is the issue. When I said to Senator Bunting, if you are in the rental business as a master developer, and I use that term, you will be developing, and it relates to the other question to JPS that you've asked me. You will be developing property, let's say the Caymanas Free Zone, maybe 600 acres, and you will be subletting it to people. As the master developer, your main revenue will come from renting properties. So on that part of the business, we give you a 50-year lease, and you get the rental income, which is the vast majority of your income. That will be tax-free. That is right. So I stay right on that. Minister Clark is right also in saying, when you do come to a place as a developer, and let's say 5 years or 15 years, you're going to have extra cash flow. You could invest it in shares. You could invest it in real estate. And you would then make income that is not rental related to your main cause. On that, you would pay the 12.5% that you would normally pay in the zone, as you would get from a zone user. And if you, of course, employ more Jamaicans, you could reduce that to as little as 7.75%. So both are right. But there is a very special benefit if you're a master developer that you will get that tax-free benefit. Now, the issue of the electricity and bundling it, you would have to, we are tied to the arrangement that we have with JPS now, which you're very familiar with. So I couldn't be a master developer, for instance, Senator Bunting, develop properties that many of my friends will lease, and I transmit electricity to them that I produce. The law does not allow that at the moment. So we still have that issue, but if I were a user and I bring in my own solar energy and so on, each individual would have to do that. So clearly, you're talking about a bigger situation that we really have to address, not just for the zones, but for the country, but that's a different discussion. On the amount of the zones operational, I got correction. Janice, who is our legal luminary from the SEZ, tells me, and she has to see all of them, she tells me that we actually have 167 operating. 167 zones operating. Zones. No. Zones. No, we have in here. No, we have, they're approved. They're 167 approved. All might not yet be operating. Some of them are building out. And that happens. The next question, the next relative question you had is, what's happening in the zones? Well, today we have about 75 operating companies in the zone. In 2019, just before the pandemic, they employed about 43,000 Jamaicans. There was primarily BPOs. There was a little dip for a few months, but the most consistently growing economic zone and sector in this country has been the BPO through the pandemic. Through the pandemic, will you tell him not to disturb the speaker? So we have, what we have now, Senator Bunting, is north of 55,000. Yesterday, I was in New Kingston. I must tell you frankly, I've been to a lot of these zones. And when I walked into the new zone New Kingston yesterday, at the New Kingston Shopping Center. At the top, they said, go up the ramp. And I drove, this place is magnificent. It's owned by a Moroccan firm. The principals were here. They came in their private jet. Diane said I have to meet them. It was really well worth the while. Very interesting. They've employed 600 people up there. The place is magnificent. And they are going to add a lot more. They're operating in 16 countries. They want to grow in Jamaica because it's close to that big market that we all know about. So it's growing, and we're past 55,000, and we expect that to continue to grow. But more importantly, as we talked with the Moroccans yesterday, is that we want to now upscale the skill, and for that we've set up a global digital services task force, which I chair, and Jamper runs, on money that we've gotten from the IDB, $15 million that we've borrowed, to train our people through heart to make sure that we get them to move into the knowledge processing outsourcing business, not just the BPO. So it's a good success story and something that we can continually work on to make sure it grows. Those, I think, were the main questions that was asked. Well, I'm going to talk about Singapore for you, because the Singapore people, I met them recently. They have done tremendous work in getting the zone prepared to sell to investors that will want to come in. They've done a very good job. They continue to work with us, and it's just that the job that they do, they don't build buildings, and so you don't see an opening for something that the Singaporeans did. But the intellectual property and the guidance they give us in administration is very valuable, and we keep developing it. I'll have to answer that question from Janice. It might have been, but they're doing good work. And Mr. President, I ask that the bill goes through its third reading.
Second.
She read a second. I got direction from the clerk to be read the second time. A second reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Special Economic Zones Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Minister Hill, Senator Bunting, we good? All right. So we have the clause 1 through to clause 5. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with no amendments. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with no amendments.
Mr. President, I ask that the bill be read a third time. Thank you.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Special Economic Zones Act, read a third time and passed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And just to say thanks again to Janice Williams from the SEZ, and especially Mrs. Yvette Sutherland-Reed from my office, who runs the legal activities in my office. They did a tremendous amount of work, and Ms. Ramsey from Finance. Thank you all so very much.
Minister.
Mr. President, it's not intended to do any further work today, unless you would like us to start the bail act today. But Seems everybody has the appetite for it. But no, it's not intended to do any further business today, President. And with that, we ask for sitting to be suspended for a date to be fixed.
If you just allow me, given that we are facing this weekend a potential tropical storm, to wish the staff and indeed all our colleagues a safe weekend, and we hope that they can, get an early start on any preparations are necessary. I know there's a lot of uncertainty. We pray that it will pass without damage, but we need to recognize that this is not the first occasion that we've held our staff here and have been loyal and faithful when others have been able to get an earlier start.
Mr. President, just on that note, just to also wish the staff and indeed all of the people of Jamaica well, and to extend a prayer for all citizens, but particularly those fisher folk who ply their trade and oftentimes push it to the limit. But we also beg and plead with them to take precautions. The other point we'd like to make, Mr. President, and I ask all colleagues, because we do have our varying constituent groups that we can communicate with. We're pleading with people to circulate information from the Met Service JA accounts. There is many forwards going around that are from previous storms and previous incidents and creating panic in some cases and complacency in other cases. Please follow the updates from the Met Service JA, which are published in the media, specifically reputable media services. Thank you.
All right, and with all that said by Minister Samuda, Senator Bunting, I don't think there's anything else that I can add to that. So we move for the adjournment. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Thank you very much.
Jamaicans, look on the murder rate. You think that normal? We need to get every illegal gun and save our country.
The proceeding was brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister.
Let's be clear.